We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And just before we started the podcast, Tom informed me he really didn't watch anything this week. So
I didn't.
Hey, I'm sure he'll think of something. I watched the second season of One Punch Man, which I had been looking forward to very much. It never came to Netflix Canada. I ended up watching it on Tubi.
Was it the whole season?
Well,
is it the one that ends with the dude who's like a magician guy?
Magician guy.
Yeah, he thinks he's a magician, and he's got a little girl that follows him around because that's how things work in anime. It was after the no, there was
no. I don't think that's this show.
What am I thinking of? Oh, I'm thinking of My Hero Academia. Okay, sorry.
Could be.
No, which one are you thinking? One Punch Man is with
Saitama and the cyborg.
The Monster Academy or something like that. Yeah,
the Monster King Orochi. And
yeah, but I don't know. I felt like I saw half of a season. Like the other half was still waiting to come out.
Season 2 of One Punch Man is not a complete story. They basically cut off at what seems like about a halfway point. So I'm very much hoping there will be a season 3 to complete the story, because this definitely set up a bunch of things that are left dangling.
There was not enough One Punch Man in the One Punch Man season 2. In my opinion.
Season 2 also didn't really circle back to any of the things that were set up by the end of season 1, but the whole creative team behind season 2 changed. It changed studios, it changed directors, it changed showrunners, so I think they were kind of doing their own thing. Anyway, I still enjoyed it, but it was not nearly as fun as season 1 of One Punch Man.
Season 1 was phenomenal. Yeah.
Season 2 was much slower. Saitama himself was like off the scene for half the season.
It's like they weren't even interested in talking about it. It's like, oh, that guy. It's very much the way I feel about Superman.
Sure.
It's like you've got somebody who's so powerful, the writers are like, what am I supposed to do with that? He can do anything. It's not, right. You can't kill him.
But
you can't hurt him.
The point of One Punch Man is that he is so bored by being so ridiculously powerful. So anyway.
The existential ennui he feels as he goes to the grocery store, just depressed as hell because he can't find anything worth doing.
No, I did like the one part where he was like genuinely scared. He's like, he's like, that attack really, really scared me. It almost knocked my wig off. Like that part was pretty good. But actually what I wanted to mention was Tubi itself, because this is my first time using that app, and I was pretty darn happy with Tubi because it is a completely free.
Ads?
Nope, it does have ads, yes. It's completely free. There is no charge, but the number of ads is more than reasonable. It's like 1 15 or 30-second spot before the show starts, and then another 15 or 30-second spot in the middle of the show at a point that makes sense where there would have been a commercial break anyway. So I'm like...
Every 15 minutes or so, because this is a half-an-hour show. Right?
Yeah, it's only a half-hour show. So I'm like, that... I'm completely fine with that. For a free service to have that, like, it's way less than YouTube as far as ads goes. That's true. So
it depends on it's just like us, right? Like for us, for YouTube, we put as few ads possible because we're not trying to make any money off of it. Yeah. But there are some creators who are like, oh my God, dude, you're freaking killing me over here. You know, but yes, I agree. Like 10 minutes, like every time 15 minutes for a commercial is fine if you're watching a half an hour show. It's when you're watching a 2-hour movie that you're like, are you for real right now?
I can see that. Yeah,
but that's the way I feel about watching cable TV anyway. Yeah. So I watched just some stuff on Apple TV. So we're not quite almost at the end of the first season of Ted Lasso. My wife is absolutely in love with it.
Oh, good.
So that's good for me.
That's been worth it then.
It has been. All of the free that we paid. Watched the first 2 or 3 episodes of The Foundation, which don't hate, but don't love.
Yeah,
I really kind of
didn't super cotton to it. They were excited for it, but then weren't over the moon about it once they actually watched it.
I feel like there's a lot they could have done that felt more like the very first book of the Foundation. Not the first chronological book, but the first book, which was really just an amalgamation of stories that he wrote that went into like the weird science.
Well, that's why they always say Foundation was like not really something you could translate one-to-one because it wasn't a single narrative.
Right. And that's fine for me. I mean, I think you could have done that. Each season could have been one of those narratives, and then it switches. They're always afraid to do stuff like that in TV and those sort of things because they've got like, oh, we got this actor and everybody loves this actor, so
there are production challenges though with that because just from a cost perspective, if you're changing sets all the time, actors all the time, like it's things.
Now they're on a ship, right? And it's like this whole thing is on a ship, and I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, Star Wars, Star Trek, whatever.
Well, it also means they got to go to some giant warehouse somewhere and build their set there and go there every day instead of having exteriors and changing the scenery.
Do the thing that the Mandalorian did.
That's what everybody's doing.
The screen.
Turns out the Batman used the volume. So that that's a gigantic Hollywood movie, not something that's going on a streaming service or a weekly TV show that has now made use of that technology, and nobody knew. Nobody was the wiser until they revealed it. So shows you the capabilities of that technology.
It's pretty awesome.
It's pretty awesome. It makes all the sense in the world. I can't imagine anything more reasonable than using the volume for as much as you can at this point.
And then I did watch like the second. I think only the second episode of Severance, which I am still liking. My wife does not.
No Mythic Quest yet?
I did watch. I'm sorry. Yes, you told me to watch it, and I told my wife. Rob told me to watch it, so I watched it, and then maybe the first 3 episodes because they're short. They're like half an hour.
Yeah.
And it's got that. Is his name Rob? Is it from
McElhaney? Yeah, Rob.
Yeah, McElhaney from the
Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Always Sunny in Philadelphia, yeah. Which I was not expecting.
Danny Pudi from Community, he's in there too, playing a fun character.
Yes,
he's having a fun time playing that character. You can tell.
And yeah, I watched it. I told my wife that you had told me to watch it, and I was like, I'm going to watch it and see if you're going to like it. And then I watched the first couple episodes, and she said, "Am I going to like it?" I'm like, "Nope."
But how about you? How about Tom?
I did.
Okay,
I did because I kind of it is. For me, because I am very keenly aware of sort of, I don't want to say the word atrocities, but it's very close to atrocities that are going on in many video game behind the scenes organizations. The crunch culture and a boys club that's very misogynistic, and they're having lots of problems with sexual harassment and a bunch of other stuff that's going on. Not to mention, I think Square Enix just sold like everything for some NFTs that aren't worth anything anymore. I think I read that this week.
I didn't hear this story.
Oh, yes. I think the studios that make Tomb Raider and
that used to be Eidos, wasn't it?
Yes,
I don't know who owns them anymore.
It doesn't matter. So they sold a whole bunch of stuff for NFTs like this day that the NFT market basically lost 98%.
Yeah.
So, because everybody finally caught on that no matter how much you want those stupid apes to make money for you, they can't because they're stupid.
I just wanted to mention why, like the whole NFT thing. I don't know enough about it to have a proper opinion, but why do all the ones that are just created to be NFTs, all the images that are created to be nothing but NFTs, why are they all so ugly? I don't
they're procedurally generated from what I understand.
But why do they have to be that ugly? I don't understand why all of them look exactly the same style and are ugly. Why was that the thing?
Because it was never worth anything to begin with. It was only worth what you could convince somebody else to pay for it.
I just found it strange that you didn't try to at least make it a little bit aesthetically pleasing. And they all just copy each other. It's all the exact same art style. Every single one. Weird. Anyway, that's that. I'm eager for you to get to the episode called A Dark Quiet Death, because that was
okay. I have too many things to watch right now. Yes. I also started that Open Range. I watched the first episode of that with Josh Brolin. It's about a ranch with a hole in it, basically. So I watched the first episode of that, which was pretty good. Then stopped because whatever.
After saying you didn't watch anything, all the things on the list.
Well, this is just like TV shows. I didn't watch any movies.
Okay,
this week, so whatever. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff out there.
No kidding.
I don't know. It is a little overwhelming sometimes. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to kind of power through. But I'm going to bed really early because I'm waking up really early to go cycle. So it's Like I have to be very careful about much to watch, and then I have to factor in family time. If you want to know what I watch most often, Avengers Assembled on Disney Plus.
Okay.
Because that's what my 12-year-old wants to watch, and I can watch it and nobody else cares what we're watching it, and they all leave the room. That's what I watch the most of. It's kind of terrible.
Oh,
but
all right.
It's animated and
good enough.
Good enough. You can see the season where they started making the Marvel Avenger movies and stuff, because all the costumes changed and everything. It was pretty funny. All right, this is AVRant Podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your question answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us a question at avrant.com. You can go to avrant.com, see our old episodes, listen to them, see the show notes, click on the links. Facebook.com/AVRant Podcast is a good way to keep up with what we're doing. Sometimes ask us questions, though. If you want to get them answered, you'll send them the question at avrant.com.
Yes,
YouTube.com/AVRant Podcast.
Nope, just AVRant on YouTube. YouTube.com/AVRant. It's the only one that's short, but that's the one.
I know, and sometimes I don't say it right because if you type out AVRant Podcast, you're still going to get there.
Yes, that's true.
Let's see. If you want to contact Rob directly, it's rob at avrant.com. His Twitter's at FirstReflect. Tom at avrant.com. Twitter's at avrant_Tom. I thank our listeners of the week. Excuse me. Coffee is repeating on me here.
Yep.
Become a listener of the week. All you have to do is support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leave us a PayPal donation. So we want to thank 3 people who did that this week, including Raph, who was also here last week, and I had to confirm that he had done it 2 weeks in a row. So, confirm in my head because I had to look at the dates. But it's a really unusual to have somebody give us 2 donations back to back. So thank you doubly to Raph as well as Donald and Aras. So thank you, Raph, Donald, and Aras.
Yes, indeed. Raph, Donald, and Aras, thank you very much for the PayPal donations. We appreciate your financial support.
Yeah, we also want to thank our 142 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where you can sign up to be a ongoing, contributing, supporting, subscribing listener part of our podcast community.
That's the official title.
It's
you can put it on your business card.
You should. It might be the only thing on the you might have to put it on the back. Title on back.
Typeface, small font.
142 patrons we have over there. Every month, Patreon takes a little bit of money from them, however much they want, and gives most of it to us. So I'm going to thank you to our 142 patrons, including Ken, Chris, and Chris. And Chris says he bumped his pledge up by an extra $1 a month. I don't know if that makes it $1,001 or 2. But I'm guessing it's 2.
Regardless.
So thank you, Chris, for the 100% increase in your donation.
That's right. Patreon.com/AVRant Podcast. If you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, big thanks to our 142 patrons over there, Ken and Chris. Thank you for being 2 of them.
All right, if you can't support us financially, just do something. Let us know what you did so that we can mention it over here. So Gurinder said he put his money where his mouth is after saying he prefers the print version of books whenever possible. He got a print version of my book, Bob Moore, No Hero, and a print version of some other book I've never heard of called The Oracle. I don't know what that is.
I know.
I don't know. Yeah. It's written by somebody who's probably the niece of somebody else.
That's right.
We would never try to support anybody else, but since these 2 books are here, there they are.
There's an image of them, so they exist.
Yeah, there you go. They exist.
Physical print copies. There they are, side by side on your YouTube.
I will say it looks like, I'm going to be honest with you, and I don't want to demean this other book, but it looks like a child created that cover. That's all I'm going to say. It looks like a child created that cover. I'm not saying it's bad. It's not. It's good. It looks very nice, but it's got a childlike whimsy to it. If you are so inclined, the Orb Oracle. I don't know who wrote this or what's going on with that, but there it is.
Yep.
With its childlike whimsical cover.
It's also physically bigger than Tom's book, so there's that.
I don't appreciate that at all. I will tell you that much. I think you should have done one of those Lord of the Rings things where you put my book a little forward so my book looked bigger.
That's right. Camera perspective.
Forced perspective there, buddy. If you cared about this podcast at all, Gurinder, you would support me in that way. All right. Aras also mentioned us to the staff of a Simply Stereo, and I guess that's a store, when he visited them to demo some Per Listen speakers after he heard Per Listen's setup at Expona. AXPONA, for those of you who are wondering what the heck I'm saying. He was a bit worried he had made a mistake in purchasing his KEF reference speakers, but Simply Stereo had both, so he was able to do a head-to-head comparison. He came away thinking there's a little back and forth, a little better imaging from one, a little better bass from the other, but considering the prices, he's happy to keep his KEFs for now, which is good. It's often the case that when you put so much time and distance between your listening sessions and then you're listening in completely different situations, who knows how well that actually stacks up to what you have at home. So at least being able to listen to them in the same room, even though it's not your room, gives you a little bit better perspective.
A little bit.
So that's
it's certainly a little better than hearing one all by itself and days later hearing the other in a completely different environment. But to Gurinder and Aras, thank you for supporting the podcast. It's appreciated. And glad that Aras's mind is a little bit put at ease.
Yes, I am. Boy, I had spent many a sleepless night. I'm going to be honest with you, Aras. I have not slept well knowing that you didn't know if you had bought the right speakers. Because that's the kind of guy I am. I'm a carer. I'm a giver. I'm a empath. Like
definitely not that he had forgotten about it until he read it just now. There's no chance.
No chance of that, Aras. It's been at the forefront. My wife is sick of me talking about it. In fact, I'm going to text her right now and let her know what has happened.
On your phone that isn't silenced, because I did hear it go budding earlier on.
Go off in the other room, and yes, I'm mad at myself. We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going from Ken Gurinder Donald, who says he's a long-time 2-hour-plus club member, but he must admit to not knowing the secret word. Jack knows the secret word because he sent it to us. And he also suggests maybe we should introduce a new secret word for the 2-hour-plus club every 100 episodes or so. Not a bad idea, but
I kind of like that idea.
Now that you said it, I'm going to reject doing it out of hand.
Well, we're also going to wait until episode 900, so it's going to be a while.
Who knows? No, we can't do it on an actual number.
Because okay.
It's got to be in there someplace. You see, because for those of you that don't know the secret word, neither of us have any idea what episode it's on.
So long ago. There is no chance I'm going back.
Literally hundreds of episodes
Wasn't
ago.
it actually titled it, though? So it's possible that you could probably search it. I think the title was actually the secret word.
Was it really?
That?
It could be.
Yeah.
We honestly don't know.
I vaguely remember that.
Honestly, don't know.
Yep.
But, so, I'm sorry. Scott and Aras, I already said that. So, notes of gratitude. Thank you for thanking us, Ken, Gurinder, Donald, Jack, Scott, and Aras.
Yep, I'll say the names one more time. Ken, Gurinder, Donald, Jack, Scott, and Aras. Thank you all very much for sending those notes of gratitude to us, for keeping the podcast going. The notes of encouragement are very much appreciated, and a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
And there's my phone again. News. Microsoft is pushing ahead with their Xbox Cloud gaming plan with the intention to release a small streaming service that will work with an Xbox Game Pass Ultimate subscription to stream Xbox games as well as all the usual TV and movie streaming services. They're calling this Xbox Everywhere. And since Samsung is their official gaming TV partner, they will have an Xbox Everywhere app for the Samsung TVs. No need for the streaming device on those. So, what? I don't know what this means. None of this makes any sense.
Right, so it means you don't need to buy an Xbox Series S or an Xbox Series X to play Xbox games. They are using their cloud streaming service on a lightweight device. Think of a Roku, think of a Amazon streaming stick, that type of form factor, where that doesn't have all the graphical capability built into it. All of that is happening on a server out there in the cloud, and just the video feed is getting streamed to you. So this is sort of the vision for the future of gaming, the idea that people won't have to purchase $500 home consoles as long as streaming the game over the internet has low enough latency and high enough bandwidth. That's what they're aiming for. So this is the beginning of it. They're branding it Xbox Everywhere, and the idea is that there'll just be apps built into smart TVs. They're starting with Samsung.
Amazon Prime have something like this too?
There's Google Stadia. That's very much the same idea. Amazon has Luna. That's the same idea. PlayStation has what used to be PlayStation Now and will now be PlayStation Plus Premium. I think that was the name for the one that includes the game streaming. So yeah, lots of different companies coming at this same idea of streaming games to you instead of you needing powerful hardware at home.
Right. The Luna one, I know that I covered it for AV Gadgets, and I know that there's a way of there's like 5 games if you have the Prime service.
Okay.
Full stop. There's like every month they swap them out. There's a certain number of games that you have access to. Full stop. But then you have to have it connected to something that has a controller because they're all kind of controller based. So
the other thing Xbox Everywhere was supposed to be able to let you do is if you have games that are installed on an Xbox Series X, let's say, then you could play those on another TV in your house through this lightweight device instead of needing a whole second console. Or you could even play them remotely somewhere. You bring the little streaming stick with you and you plug it into a TV anywhere, and as long as you have a good internet connection, you can play the games off of your actual home console. So that's another thing.
Great. Press photos for the new $250 Sonos Ray soundbar have leaked, and as expected from the price, it's an extremely basic 2-channel unit with only Ethernet and optical inputs. It doesn't even have an HDMI ARC port, which honestly, who cares?
Well, I don't know. So there are a number of TVs that are foregoing even an optical output anymore.
I know.
And just relying on HDMI ARC. So I'm not certain this is the best choice to have only optical.
I don't know. How much money are they actually saving by getting rid of that optical port? Interestingly, 1 or 2 Sonos Ray units can be utilized as the surround speakers if you have the larger $900 Sonos Arc Dolby Atmos soundbar up front. But the real news is that Sonos will be introducing their own voice assistant because we don't have enough of those in our lives right now. Hey, Sonos. So if you have it and you're listening to this in the future and your soundbar just said what? It's not my fault. It doesn't exist during this timeline in this part of the multiverse. So I was going to say, you haven't seen Doctor Strange yet, but of course you haven't because it's outside with people, and that's the same reason why I'm not going out there. And somebody asked me this week. They texted me. They have you seen it yet? Like on Saturday. I'm like, seen what? Like, because I thought it could have been anything. I mean, news or something happened. Like Doctor Strange. I'm like, I didn't go to see movies before the pandemic. Right. I'm sure not going to go
and
now.
It'll be on Disney Plus between 30 and 60 days from now. So, it's not that long a wait.
Yeah. Okay. So for years, I've been trying to get Google and Amazon to agree for letting people to use either of those voice assistants at the same time. But so far, you've always had to choose one or the other during setup. Obviously, introducing yet another voice assistant of their own will solve everything. So now you can't have Google. You can't have
Well,
Apple.
You probably still can. You can choose. They've never worked with Siri, as far as I know, built right into them.
The other one.
So,
Echo one.
Yeah. So they're like, well, we couldn't get everybody to play nicely together, so we'll introduce our own because, if there isn't one universal standard, then we'll create one and that'll work instead of just creating yet another thing that doesn't interoperate with everything else.
LG Display is looking to borrow micro lens technology from small mobile OLED panels in order to increase light output from their large screen OLED TV panels. Around 1200 nits peak brightness is expected. Micro lenses channel light from each OLED subpixel more efficiently, which should also result in power savings and longer panel lifespans. They're expected to implement micro lenses into OLED panel manufacturing in late 2022, which means we might see them in LG's 2023 OLED models. They'll be called QD Lens OLED XI.
I mean, so far LG's OLEDs are not using quantum dots, so they probably wouldn't put a QD in there, but
it'll be QL. Quantum lens technology, because everything's got to be quantum.
They do like that word. But yes, I'm a little bit wondering if this is going to narrow the viewing angle, though. Because, this makes all the sense in the world. You've got these little subpixels. Each subpixel is its own individual tiny little organic light-emitting diode.
I wonder if this would include this would increase blooming and stuff like that too. I mean,
blooming on an OLED when every single pixel is individually controlled, probably not blooming, but I'm thinking saying more off-axis.
Well, okay, so you're thinking that it's going to narrow the
because right now beam. OLED TVs have very wide viewing angles. You can walk way over to the side, up or down, and the image doesn't change very much at all, unlike LCDs where they very obviously dim and lose color saturation as you move over to the side. But if you're going to use a little micro lens in front of each subpixel or in front of each pixel to basically focus the light normally that light is spreading pretty darn evenly in every direction coming out of the little subpixel OLED. So if you're using microlensing to sort of focus that light more forward, and therefore you're boosting the peak brightness that gets delivered to your eyes, but I'm thinking then off axis, you must be reducing what goes off axis. You're lensing it more forward. I
guess I was thinking that if the lens was actually just not dispersing it, but you know what I mean? That's widening it somehow, but also making it brighter at the same. Like, I don't know. Could be anything.
I would think they're narrowing it to send more
I would think
forward.
so. I would think so too, but who knows?
Yeah. This is still just a report. It's on the manufacturing side, so these. If you're like, well, I guess I'm not going to get a C2 and I'm going to wait for the C3 and it's going to have this. It might not have this. This might not happen. They haven't started actually making it yet. But it's just the idea of where is LG's OLED panel technology going next? This appears to be the next step. Tom is just stunned. He's nonplussed.
Not stunned.
He has no idea what to say to this.
I'm just thinking about how little I possibly care about all that. I mean, people are having, like, if you listen to people making decisions about TVs, so much of the technology you and I talk about in this podcast, it's that vocabulary does not exist.
I know.
You know what I mean? It is simply price to size.
Very
and
much so. Oh, yeah. I mean, if you search...
which one is better?
Yes, if you search Best Buy for most popular or Amazon for most popular, guess what? It's the biggest at the cheapest price that you can find. Right. Although people will often go for a name brand over a brand they don't recognize at all. That is true. So they'll pay $25 extra for the Samsung or something like that.
Sure. Right. Then they get them home and they post pictures up to Reddit. They're like, why is... I have a black screen. How come it looks like this? They're like, you bought an edge-lit TV. That's what it looks like.
Or all splotchy and cloudy.
And I've seen it, and I know I've seen it, but now that I've seen it as many times as I've seen it recently, I'm like, yeah, I mean, that is something that you should, that everybody will notice. That is not a subtle thing.
It's why I have never been able to accept an LG LCD TV. Yeah. As much as I love their OLEDs, I've never been able to, I can't get behind it because you bring it home and you turn on something and you look at a gray or a black screen and it's a blotchy, cloudy mess. And I've never been able to accept that.
All right, some comments from our listeners. Jason wanted to give SVS some kudos and praise. The amp on one of his SVS subwoofers stopped working. He emailed SVS customer support and explained the troubleshooting he already tried. The sub is out of warranty, and he noted that in his email. He requested the price for a replacement amp. They wrote back in less than 30 minutes and said that since he's out of warranty, he'd need to cover shipping, but as long as he paid for that, they'd send him a replacement amp, no charge. This was above and beyond in Jason's book, and now he's legitimately looking for an excuse to buy another subwoofer for them. Dude, you should probably talk to a different podcast. I'm going to be honest with you. I want to tell you, go ahead and buy another one. But we are the wrong podcast for that. We are not the right podcast for people who just want to buy things. I'm so over people. Even last week we were talking about the guy who just wanted to get bigger subs because he likes bigger subs.
He's coming up again. That's Aras.
You can't. I mean, you can, because I can't stop you, but you shouldn't. And but there are lots of podcasts out there that will absolutely 100% tell you to buy the bigger, the more, the third sub or whatever.
But yes, the two sides of this. First of all, I mean, obviously excellent. We're always happy to hear that. We're happy that you're happy. That's the main thing. I don't want people to think that this should be considered the norm, that if another company doesn't do this, that they're bad. This is above and beyond. It's well within every company's right to say, okay, you're out of warranty, you need to cover the cost of the repair.
You also have to think about how he came at them too.
Absolutely.
He didn't come at them with
this is what I demand.
Your sub is crap, and I can't believe that this happened. There's no excuse for it. You guys need to make this right, or you need to send me another amp. He was like, "Yeah, I'm out of warranty. I know I'm out of warranty. What can I do?" And that's If you don't email that way, if you don't talk to other people that way, you're a terrible person, number one. But second, don't expect anybody to bend over backwards for you. Because I know I sure as heck don't. So, when you come at a company that way, like I bought new cycling clothes for the first time pretty much since I started cycling. And because I've tried to buy clothes, but they've just never fit right. So I always end up sending them back to Amazon. So I contacted this company and they sent me something, and I noticed that there was like a discoloration on them. I'm like, oh, whatever. I don't really care. I don't care that much about little things like that. But then after I wore them for the first time, I took them off and realized that discoloration actually indicated there was a hole. In like a rubber, it's a silicone leg band that keeps everything tight on your legs. And so I took a picture of it and I sent it to them and said, hey, I just want to let you know, I noticed this. What can I do, or what's the next step here? And before I could even, they sent me an email saying, hey, sorry, we're going to send you a new one. Before I could write back and say thanks, I really appreciate it, blah blah blah. I already gotten the shipping notification. So that, I'm not saying that it's because they shouldn't have done it. They should have. But it certainly makes a difference on how you come at people.
Well, and that's the flip side of this. That I want, if anybody is part of a company, part of customer service, or running your own company, when you do go above and beyond like this, it absolutely does foster brand loyalty. Yes. He's saying, sorry, who are we talking? Jason. Jason is saying, he doesn't really need another subwoofer. He's looking for an excuse to get another one, and specifically from SVS because of this customer service. So that is definitely the positive side of it. That's the thing to consider. That's an intangible. You can't put that on your, ledger.
Website. Yeah, you can't put that as part of your thing. Like we're the best customer. Yeah, everybody claims great customer service,
and
but
you can't
some people
plan on making revenue from it. You can't put that as part of your business model prediction. But definitely, it does foster goodwill. So happy to hear about that, Jason. And happy you're happy again.
Honestly, I don't know exactly what happens here, but those amps are going to come back. The one that I don't know what he's doing with his old amp, but they're probably asking for it back, and even they might not. So from their perspective, I don't know. I always think it makes sense to make things to do everything you can, but at the same time, you will go out of business if people start taking advantage of that.
Right.
So. More good news from Jack. He wrote us a few weeks ago asking what he should do about the vertical cyan line that had permanently shown up on his Epson 5050 UB projector. Did you knock it on the side and say, hey, like Fonzie? Right. No Fonzie fans out there? Sorry.
Or Han Solo.
We advised him to at least try contacting Epson's customer service. He called their phone number. Was pleasantly surprised when somebody answered right away. They went through several troubleshooting steps with him, but after that formality, they said this is a not uncommon issue. He had purchased it as a refurbished unit about a year ago. Epson informed him that they would do a replacement swap. He would need to cover the cost of shipping his effective unit to them, but that's it. They also said they could ship the replacement immediately as long as he was okay with a whole charge being placed on his credit card. Then he could use their box to ship back his projector, and there'd be no charge except for the one-way shipping back to them. So Epson took good care of him as a customer, and thanks to us for the advice. This is how I wish all companies would do things.
Right?
I know that. I know that it's I think from their end it's kind of a pain, and then there's also the danger that somebody will somehow contest the charge, and then they have to fight with the credit card company and everything else. But this is how I wish all exchanges went, because too often you're like, you send it in, and then when we get it, we'll ship out your
But there's like a 2-week lag in there, or a 6 to 8 week lag in there. Yeah.
So I wish this is how all companies did it, but I understand why they don't, and it's because there's terrible people out there who will take advantage.
But once again, this is a happy Epson customer now. Someone who the next time they're looking to buy another projector is going to think of Epson, right? So I'm happy that Jack is happy, and good all around. Yay.
I'm going to write a title for this podcast at the top here, so why don't you start the next one?
All right, well, that'd be another comment. That's from Enrique. He just said that he wanted to thank us for our suggestions for projectors under $1,000. We suggested several last week, so that list got him to look at BenQ that he hadn't really been looking at before, and then he managed to find a BenQ TK800M. That's one of the DLP units that uses a 1080p DLP chip, but shifts it 4 times per frame to put 4K up there, is compatible with HDR as well. Now, he found that on sale for under $1,000. The normal price on that, the retail price, is $1,450. You'll typically find them selling for about $1,200. That's why it wasn't on the list of projectors that I mentioned last week for under $1,000, but he found one on sale for under $1,000. So he double checked with me on Twitter, sent me a DM, and he's like, hey, is this one that would be like a bad choice? My only warning is that the TK800M is basically a slightly less expensive version of BenQ's HT2550, which is a 4K projector that I've recommended frequently. That's like a $1,500 4K projector. The TK800M just takes out all of the lens movement. It's got a teeny tiny little zoom range, a 1.1 times zoom range, but other than that, there's no lens shift like there is on the upgraded model. So, you know, they reduce some of the cost by basically downgrading the lens. But other than that, it's a pretty darn good projector. So he jumped on it. And there you go. That's fantastic. And even though it wasn't something that we actually mentioned and linked to, it got him to look in the right direction. So congrats, Enrique.
Oh, right. That's great. Mm-hmm. I'm so excited. Who is this again? Oh, my God.
Yeah.
You know that my middle son is going to States for pole vaulting on Friday. So I am...
Congrats.
Very excited. Going to States on Friday. And then Saturday morning at 7 a.m. So I'm in Florida. Mm. The state I am in is in Florida. Mm-hmm. The competition I'm going to is in Florida, just so that we're all clear.
Sure, but Florida's a big state, so...
It is, which is important to note, because at 7 a.m. the next morning, Saturday morning, he has to check in for a climbing competition for divisionals, which is the division of the entire whatever, Eastern Coast or whatever, and it's in North Carolina. So my brain has, if I don't remember that your question exists, it's because I got a couple of things going on right now.
You're going to have to take a flight, right? You can't drive that.
I am driving that. It's not that bad. It's going to be like 7 or 8 hours or something.
Right. Oh. Flight might be cheaper and easier, man.
It's not. Believe me, we looked. Even with gas prices.
I know. That's what I was thinking.
Questions here. Kiran from India. Kiran has noticed that when he looks up the frequency response specs on a lot of headphones, they'll often list an extremely low extension below 20 hertz, sometimes in the single digits. Mm-hmm. What is the point of that? We cannot hear anything below 20 hertz, right? And we aren't feeling sub 20 hertz frequencies in our bodies as they're being played by headphones rather than giant subwoofers, correct? So what is the logic behind designing headphones with extension below 20 hertz? The logic is that when something moves and they can make a reasonable claim that it moves at a certain volume, that they are going to list that, because somebody will look at it and go, well, this one plays to 16 hertz and this one plays to 6. So the 6 hertz one must be better.
There's some of that,
most of that, most of the headphones I review just a ridiculous number of headphones these days because they love sending them out because they're cheap for them to send out. They get a review and they don't have to worry about return shipping because nobody ever wants them back because most of them are in-ear things, and that's gross. Yeah. So I review a lot of stuff. It is rare that I can ever hear anything that is below like 30 hertz. Yeah. You really start to feel and hear the stuff in your or on your ear, depending on what kind of headphones you are, around 30, even though they have extension well below that. And, first of all, I'm not listening at reference volume because no, it's really loud and I don't want to.
And potentially if you did, you might detect something a little bit lower because that's how human hearing works.
That is how it works. But second, there's just not that much content down there anyway. So what's the big deal? Yeah, I mean, they make a lot of claims like that. I really care so much more about linearity. Linearity in headphones is remarkably important to me versus having insane extension. It's like, it's got a tipped up high end and a tipped up low end, so it's you can really hear the highs and really hear the lows. I'm like, yeah,
which is pretty common, that V-shaped curve. I was gonna mention how typically I would say most often I don't see a plus or minus 3 dB spec attached to headphone frequency response, but there's a very good reason for that, which is that if you just measure the raw response of a headphone, you put it on, one of those dummy head rigs that has microphones inside of the dummy head's ears, and you just measure the raw response of a headphone, we aren't actually looking for that response inside of a dummy head's ears to be a flat line. We've got the Harman curve. I'm pretty sure that based on the Harman curve, there actually is like a standard now, a sort of standard target curve that's being used for headphones. Like, I mean, it's been sort of like codified by one of the standardization bodies outside of Harman. I'm not 100% on that, but I think that's the case at this point. But regardless, that is not a flat line. Unlike a speaker in an anechoic chamber, the way that headphones need to be measured, because you can't really measure you can't put a standard flat microphone in front of an in-ear monitor's, little nozzle and get a reading. You have to use something like a dummy head with microphones inside of its ears. So we aren't really looking for plus minus 3 dB. We're looking for a tolerance within its target curve, like adhering to the target curve, but we're not looking for just a raw response of plus minus 3 dB. So sometimes the reason on a headphone that you'll see a frequency response extension that goes down to 6 hertz or something like that is they are just being factual. It's like there is a response that low, and they're simply reporting that. They're not really reporting how accurate it is compared to the Harman curve, which the Harman curve doesn't go down into single digits anyway, because we can't perceive them. So there's a little bit of that going on as well. I'm somewhat forgiving of that. It's basically just an indication that this is the frequency to which there is some response, there's some movement happening in the driver of this headphone at this given frequency, and sometimes they're just reporting that as opposed to saying it's any sort of advantage in terms of what you'll hear. So some of it is marketing, some of it is just being factual because of the fact that headphones don't measure as a flat line.
Dan wants to get our thoughts on a range of topics. So I like gas ranges. Okay. Generally speaking, in case you're wondering, I prefer them.
Real fire electric, for Tom.
Over electric or induction. I will say I have not used a ton of induction. And by a ton, I mean any.
It's hard to use a wok on an induction stove. I'll say that.
It is. I will say that all my pots are induction ready just in case I ever decided to upgrade or side grade or something. Whatever. Did John ever let us know if the zap pop sound from his NVIDIA Shield got resolved? Dan recalls many years ago that he had a BenQ receiver. It lacked a soft muting circuit, so whenever the audio signal changed, there was a popping sound very similar to what John described. So maybe John's Outlaw Pre-Pro has a soft muting circuit issue? Sure.
So John did not report back. I do not know if it got resolved. I don't know what you could do about it other than contacting Outlaw.
You can't do anything about that.
Yeah, that's not something
I was just going to say
a DIY repair. That is a suggestion from Dan to John. John, if you're listening, that is something you could contact Outlaw and ask them about, because I do know that John said this wasn't happening before. This was a new development. So it's not that his Outlaw Pre-Pro just lacked that soft muting circuit like Dan's BenQ receiver did back in the day, but maybe something went awry there. So, you could ask Outlaw about it, but I don't know, Dan, and we'll just hope that John is listening and pass that along to him.
So we seem to talk about Denon and Marantz in the same breath most of the time. Their reps online have said that they share a good amount of parts, but they're designed separately and do have differences. I'm going to take umbrage with the design separately because I don't think that's true.
They do have separate design teams. That's a fact.
They do have differences. Yep. I think they're all using the same boards.
I mean, certainly the video, they make no bones about it. The video section is all shared because it only makes sense. But yeah, they'll say there is some difference in the DACs, there is some difference in the audio circuitry, and they do have separate design teams between the two brands.
So according to Audio Science Review's measurements of their DAC sections, Denon's models actually measure a little bit better, which was a bit of a surprise since they tend to cost less than Marantz. So is there any reason to offer Marantz over Denon for similarly spec'd models? Pre-outs is mostly.
Yeah, sometimes pre-outs.
Aesthetics. I like the way Marantz's look better, to be honest with you.
The front panel, although, there's that, a lot of them until you get to the higher model numbers just have the little porthole display. So if you want a nice big display with lots of information on the receiver itself, then I wouldn't opt for Marantz. The other big one
I want them to make the gold ones again with the porthole displays. That's what I want. Bring out the special edition with the gold one, please.
But the other one is 7.1 analog inputs. It's very rare to find any multi-channel analog inputs on Denon anymore. I can't even remember I think you have to go all the way up to the 8500H before you find any multi-channel analog inputs on a Denon model, whereas Marantz will have multi-channel analog inputs on theirs. That's about it. that's really
there's not a lot.
Nope.
There's not a lot.
Not much difference.
It kind of depends on, and I've said this in articles on AV Gadgets and on this podcast numerous times. You shop receivers based on what you'll actually use and what you need. And by the time you get to the end of that, you've whittled it down to so few models and maybe even just this one or higher in this line, this one or higher in this line. And you're like, well, why would I go higher? There's no reason to. So it's this one or this one. And you're down to 2 or 3, maybe.
And especially these days, it very well could just come down to availability. Because you'll be like, okay, the Marantz sister model is listed at $150 or $200 more, but I can get it, or vice versa. So
Tommy thought he was buying a new receiver too the other day. I actually texted Rob.
Oh, yeah. You should mention that.
Yeah. So what happened was, I think and this happens very rarely with my Harmony, but occasionally I'll turn my entire system off and the receiver says, "Nah, I'm good. I'm going to stay on." So the receiver, I think, stayed on, for 24 hours, which is not a big deal. It doesn't draw that much power, but it was just sitting there. So when we turned on the TV and we started, the projector and everything, because I only have the one viewing room, and we turned everything on, the volume control was not coming up on the screen. I was like, that's weird. So I tried to go up and go into the settings to figure out, if I had somehow disabled it. The settings wouldn't come up on the screen. In fact, nothing would come up on the screen. It was very irritating. So I went over to the actual receiver itself and pressed the setup or the whatever it is menu button, and nothing would come up on the screen, on the Denon or on my TV screen. Like nothing. Now I can change inputs and I could change the volume manually, and I could change the volume with the remote. It wouldn't show on the screen, but it would show on the Denon's
front panel display.
Front panel. But that was it. And I was like, man, what is going on? So I felt the top of the receiver and it was freaking hot. Now, you guys will remember about a year and a half ago, we had a lot of construction done in this house. Well,
yes.
One of those I had much construction done. Most of the teams were excellent. One team was not, and they did not do a very good job of dust mitigation, and I have been suffering with dust in this house ever since. Well, what had happened is, finally the dust had accumulated enough on the inside of this receiver that it was just overheating. So I took a vacuum cleaner and some compressed air, and I blew it out and sucked out all the dust I could without taking the top off because it was all plugged in. It was actually still in operation. Like I didn't turn it off.
Okay.
I just this is just
it's a little bit iffy, but all right.
Well, people were watching, so what was I going to do? So I did that, and then it cooled off immediately, and everything started working again.
And yes, the video section generates more heat than the amplifiers do. So
I said that on Reddit one time, and I got absolutely roasted for it.
True, though. Well,
doesn't matter.
I suppose
doesn't
maybe
matter
if you measured the total BTUs, because of course the amplifier section has heat sinks on there, so maybe if you accumulated the total BTUs, the amplifiers actually do. But in terms of temperature that is reached, the video section gets hotter. That's the way to put it.
All right, next in Dan's questions here. Speaker wire. Gene from Audioholics was one of the strongest voices back in the day about expensive speaker wires being a waste of money, but now he uses Kimber cable and has praised their measurements and reviews, and whenever he talks about them online. Mm-hmm. Yep, he does.
And I have been critical of that.
Yeah, we have noticed. Dan recalls that Ray Kimber has talked about designing the original Kimber cable speaker wires to reject interference, but is that really something we should be concerned about? No.
You would know if you needed to be. That's basically
this is
where
not
it
a
came
subtle
from.
thing.
Now, here is the thing. I will say, like where the whole thing came from, this idea of braiding your speaker wires to create some sort of signal interference rejection. This was when he was having to drape speaker wire across fluorescent lights. That's where the whole genesis came from, at least the story, according to the way Ray Kimber has told it. He was having to run speaker wires over and right next to fluorescent lights. Naturally, that was generating a hum in the speakers themselves, and found that braiding the cables was enough to mitigate that to a large degree. So, that was sort of the genesis of where that came from. I have no beef with that. It's just that, like I say, you would know if that's what you need. You would be in a situation like that where there is no way to route around a massively noise-generating thing that is causing a very obvious and audible hum in your speakers, and then something like this could make sense. I mean, the whole thing with Gene and Audioholics being on about that, I mean, if you do look at the objective measurements, they're good. They're exactly what you would expect from the, cumulative gauge that you end up with, because of course you've got multiple leads that are being braided together at the end. But if you sort of factor what the cumulative gauge ends up being, he's like, the resistance when you measure it is like fractions of ohms lower than just straight wire. And so, okay, on an objective level, will that make any audible difference? Absolutely not. But then there's the flip side of it, which is by braiding the wire, putting all these extra bends and length into the wire, because you have all these bends in it, that will increase capacitance and reduce inductance. That is just going to happen. Right. Anything would happen if you did that. If you have two completely straight parallel wires, evenly spaced all the way, then they will have high inductance and low capacitance. If you bend them all up and twist them all around, you will reduce the inductance and increase the capacitance. And that just happens. Now, in general, if you're using very low impedance speakers, then having a higher capacitance and a lower inductance ends up being I'm not going to say beneficial, I'm going to say a non-negative thing if you do that with 4 ohm or lower speakers, and generally we aren't looking at speakers in audiophilia that are going into 32 and 64 ohms or something. We're looking at the opposite end, which is that they're dipping down to 3.2 or 2 ohms or something like that. So all of it, if you have Kimber cables and you're using them with your speakers, there is not going to be any sort of performance downside. That's not the claim we're ever going to make. They will work and sound absolutely fine and great. They also won't sound any different from the speaker wire you buy at Monoprice or from Blue Jeans Cable or anything like that. Like, Gene will point to some measurements because he's an electrical engineer and has equipment that can measure stuff that your ears absolutely cannot detect. And he will point at this slightly lower resistance, and he will point at this capacitance inductance trade-off, and he was using those gigantic RBH speakers before that dipped down to, 1.7 ohms or whatever it was. So, he can point at all of those things and be like, hey, there's an objective case for this. There is a numerical benefit that we're seeing out of these measurements. I'm like, okay, that's true. It's still like, he will point to, in his review of the Kimber cables, where he says, just get the 12 gauge Blue Jeans cable. Like, that is in the review. He's like, there's absolutely no reason anybody else needs to buy this. But these are the measurements. So I'm like, okay, to be fair, that's in there. I vehemently disagreed with his strongly recommended words in the review. I was like, strongly recommended, eh? To whom? To whom are these strongly recommended? I would just say I'm fine with not discouraged. I'm not going to discourage you from buying them. These aren't these ridiculous ones with batteries in line or that, actually damage the signal. The Kimber cables, speaker wires don't damage the signal. So I'm fine with them on that front, but I'm not going to call them strongly recommended. So that's my whole thing.
If you're wanting to know more about that whole braided cable versus non-braided cable, there is an article on Audioholics that was written years and years ago by I can't remember who. It's not Gene. Who basically did a DIY comparison and did exactly that. They braided some cables. Sure. They did all this other stuff in order to determine, if it was worth all the trouble. Because at that point, that was one of the things that people were talking about was braiding your own cables and self-terminating and all this other stuff. So there is that article up there somewhere. I don't know where it is. I'm not going to find it. I don't care. This is one of the examples of a product that is just fine for everybody, maybe is better for some very specific purposes, like what Rob was talking about with going
draping
across
them over
fluorescent
lights. Sure, yep,
or whatever. But for 99% of us, it is too much money for no discernible benefit.
And I was very disappointed when I saw a panel that included Ray Kimber, because prior to all that, on all the things he had written and everything, I was like, okay, he's a pretty reasonable guy, electrical engineer by trade as well. So I was like, I felt reasonably good about the things that were written by Ray Kimber. Then I saw him on that panel. I was like, why? It was just pure snake oil talk. What came out of his mouth was just pure snake oil talk.
Because that's what sells cables, though.
I lost a huge amount of respect from that one panel, unfortunately.
You don't sell cables by telling people that yours are just as good as everybody else's, and the cheaper ones, you should buy those. Right. But that is the truth. Yeah. That is the truth. And that's why, and so much in this hobby is that way, where, that people are trying to justify why you buy. I have literally seen what looked like a $5 surge protector, off the, embedded in a copper case, sold for $10,000. Right. I'm like, I can see the plastic outlets. Those are plastic outlets. Those, I have seen these before. This is like the one at Home Depot. You just shoved it in here. You didn't do anything. Like, does this do anything other than surge protection? No, it just is surge protection.
Right.
It's, what could possibly make this any better than anything else? Well, they're going to give you a bunch of psychobabble or technobabble, and they always kill you with words. Go to Monoprice and read their cable thing. It's like 12 gauge, oxygen-free copper, plastic, or PVC, sheath. That's it. That's all they tell you. Why? Because that's what it is.
That's right.
Right. You go to any high-end cable, and it's reams.
Yes,
it's just
very
reams.
subjective terms.
Well, and the whole thing is, if they hit you with enough words, you will eventually just say, some of this must be true.
Right.
Like, there must be some truth in here. Like, not all of it sounds real to me, but there must be something going on, or they wouldn't have written this much. Do you know how much they paid per word? If they paid $5 a word for that, they still came out way on top if you bought one cable.
Right.
Because, believe me, it doesn't cost them any more to make it than anything else. So, I've got, and I've said this on AV Gadgets. I've had Andrew said on AV Gadgets. I'm like, you can buy pretty cables.
Sure.
Buy them away, especially if they're going to be lying on the floor and you don't, and people are going to be able to see them and you don't want them to be just ugly, whatever. You can buy them, but admit that that's why you bought them. Okay. I just had a company contact me and they're like, oh, we're going to come out with this new oxygen-free copper and it's, our entry-level line is going to be great. It's $150 for like 50 feet.
Yeah.
I'm like, I just bought 100 feet of cable from Amazon in the color I wanted for like $15.
Well,
there is no
even $3 a foot isn't that bad compared to what's out there.
I know, yeah, right. And that's not that bad, but it's still like
more than it needs to be.
So there's got to be a reason. I have, and I've said this on this podcast a number of times, I have seen people who have bought monster speaker cables, and I'm like, why did you buy this? They're like, it's square. I'm like, okay. And he goes, look, and he goes, basically, all I did was lie it on top of my baseboards, which have a flat top, and it just lies there. It doesn't curl, it doesn't twist. It just lies really nice and flat without me having to really do anything to it. I'm like, okay, fair enough.
Practical reason.
That is a practical reason for wanting this. Now, if you start telling me that your speakers sound better because of it, I'm going to punch you in the nose. But, I mean, I would never resort to physical violence. At least not.
But you'd want
anything I would admit to. I would. So much.
Speaking of surge protection, but not snake oil.
Yes, power protection. We seem to be obvious fans of APC, but have we considered using Surge X products for our own setups? You mean the Surge X that we interviewed on this podcast a couple of years ago? Those guys? Yeah, it's come up. Surge X talks about how their MOVs, or metal oxide varistors, yeah. Whatever.
Not there.
Wear out.
Metal oxide varistors in general.
About how they do wear out over time, and how there's a cumulative effect from small surges that gradually make MOVs less and less effective. So do we think Surge X's series mode protection is worth it enough that we'd want it for our own systems, or is there some other solution we think is better? So we have we interviewed the Surge X guy. They're everything they're doing, to me, it's science. It makes legit sense. Yep. It's legit. It's also pricey.
Yep. But justifiably so. This isn't pricey for no reason or arbitrarily.
Right.
The circuitry in their power protection costs money to make and produce, and they are not overcharging. The fewer people are buying Surge X products when they tend to sell it. It's either for the home market, it's higher end installations, or largely it's commercial installations. That's where a ton of this stuff is going.
Yeah, so it's rack mountable and all that.
That's right.
Stuff,
so it's justifiable. It makes sense, and it's legit. This is not snake oil stuff.
There is also IO Gear is coming out with, if it hasn't already hit, because I've got a press release and I've been talking to them about getting a unit in for review. They are coming out with a rack mountable it's not a surge protector, it's a battery backup, but it's different than the other battery backups that we've seen before. Like, it basically, you are never on mains power when you're plugged into this thing.
Oh, so it's a full regeneration one. You're always on the battery.
It's a 1-to-1, like, and so it is
what they call
pricey.
An online versus an inline system.
Right. So this is a different, and more expensive than anything that you would have gotten from APC, because it's a different technology that costs more to implement and costs more to do correctly. So, there are solutions out there. Why don't we recommend them? Because most people are just trying to plug their projector in so that they can cool it down, or keep their computer on for a few more seconds so they can power it down, or whatever. Most people aren't trying to run, an entire room off of it, or a house sometimes, and they're not they're not at that level.
Well,
so they just need a little bit.
To the, do you need speaker wire that's capable of rejecting interference? If you need what Surge X supplies, you kind of know it. And most of us just don't need it. Most of us, if we're living in a place where our electrical outlets, what comes out of our electrical outlets, is pretty stable. Maybe there's some little sags and peaks. Maybe we get a brownout or a blackout once in a while. But in general, we aren't having lots of frequent power fluctuations. Power fluctuations beyond what every power supply and every electrical device is designed to work within. Because all electrical devices, their power supply will work within a range of voltages and amperages coming out of that wall outlet. But some people are in an area, maybe you're in a rural area where the power supply is, really unreliable, or you're in an industrial area where there's just so much like we're talking motors, right, that are going, that are pumping huge amounts of back EMF into the electrical power supply, because everybody's running these gigantic electrical, facilities that are going on there, and you're all there. You'd know if you need it. So,
well, I think a lot of these systems get sold to people who actually don't need it,
right.
but
the
are
just
told
in case
that they want to have it just
sure.
in case,
yeah.
and they have the money to spend on it. So,
and if you need 100% uptime, that's another area where they can do that, right? So would I ever use myself Surgex products instead of APC's products in my own place? If I were in that scenario where I need that level of protection, then yes. Where I am now, no. And not because I think Surgex is bad, definitely not. It's because they are correct. Metal oxide varistors, they wear out over time. The little surges that happen from time to time, they do reduce. It is a cumulative effect that goes on with those. But I could burn out and replace my APC power protection 7-8 times over before I would equal the price of the Surgex unit. So I'm like, well, I'm going to look at that in aggregate. And if I'm doing that every 10 years, well, in the long run, I've saved money replacing my APC unit 3 or 4 times in my lifespan, most likely, than, paying for the Surgex unit. So that's where it's a value proposition. And I think most people should go for the APC unit because most people aren't in the scenario where their power needs that level of protection.
Yeah. Light bulbs. So everything is pretty much going LED these days, but Dan claims there's just something about the way rooms feel when they're lit by LEDs versus incandescent bulbs. To him, LED lights don't feel as good. Stop wearing them, I guess. I don't know what's going on with that. The color never seems exactly right, but there's just the color never seems exactly right, but there's just some intangible element to him that doesn't feel right. Is there anything to that? Maybe incandescent bulbs dipped into the ultraviolet light that we are missing with LEDs?
That is definitely not the case. It's the opposite end where there's probably more infrared light coming out of incandescent bulbs, but it's definitely not an ultraviolet thing. So I actually just want to show, this would be a good one to follow along in the pictures posted in this episode on Flickr or on YouTube to follow along with these charts, because there is a potentially legitimate physiological reason that you would notice a difference between LED bulbs and old incandescent bulbs. If we're looking at this first series of charts that I'm showing on YouTube, if you look at sunlight, it's, this entire range of wavelengths from red light down to violet light and, of course, infrared and ultraviolet as well. But just looking at the visible spectrum, all of these wavelengths are in there. There's a little bit more blue light coming from the sun that's going on there for looking at the spectrogram, but it's the entire range of wavelengths that are there. If we look at the incandescent lamp next to it, and in fact, throughout the day, the spectrogram changes. If we're looking between noon when there's more blue light versus evening versus, dusk and nighttime when there's more red light. If we look at what the incandescent bulb is, it's kind of like dusk. That's what, this much warmer, much more red coming out of an incandescent bulb. But the incandescent bulb is, again, producing this wide range of wavelengths. If you look at the spectrogram, it's going all the way across. The whole rainbow is present. If we look at other types of lighting, fluorescent lamps, high pressure lamps, and then LEDs, we see these spikes. We see a spike at blue, a spike at green, a spike at red. If it's individual red, green, and blue LEDs, they're really sharp, prominent spikes coming from an LED. If we're looking at what most LED bulbs are, which is just all blue and then a yellow phosphor added to it, there's this big blue spike and then this sort of hump of yellow light coming from that phosphor. If we're looking at some other ones like xenon lamps and halogen lamps that we use for our projectors, we'll notice that xenon in particular is closer to sunlight. It's the whole range of wavelengths of the whole visible spectrum of light, and all pretty even. Halogen is sort of second best. It's sort of this mountainous looking thing with less blue light than what we're getting from the sun, but that's why those lamps are used in projectors. It's because they're closer to sunlight. But then we look at LEDs or incandescent bulbs, and then looking at fluorescence compared and LEDs compared to incandescence, we get these spikes in there. If we look at warm white LED bulbs, they basically just put a big old blue filter on them to take out that blue spike, and then the rest of it looks the same. So because we're not getting the entire range of wavelengths like we do from the sun or from incandescent bulbs or halogen bulbs, it's possible there's a physiological response to that there's some study on that. We know there is a thing called metamerism, which is that when you have just those spikes that we're seeing when it's just the like individual red, green, and blue LEDs with this really spiky response into it, people will actually perceive different colors. Like people's from person to person, individual perception will change when all we have are these spikes of red, green, and blue. Not everybody perceives that identically. It's one of the reasons why when someone's choosing fabric, they'll always say, make sure you see it in the light, meaning sunlight. Don't just view this fabric here under our fluorescent lights in our warehouse. Make sure you see it in a broad wavelength like sunlight, or maybe a xenon or halogen or even an incandescent bulb, so that you get a true sense of what the color of this fabric is, rather than this spiky response that you're going to get from our fluorescent lights or from our LED lights. So when you say that you detect just a feeling that is different from incandescent bulbs to LED bulbs, you're not necessarily nuts or lying or anything like that. There could be a genuine physiological reason for it.
Okay. Remote controls. We seem to focus on the consumer DIY side of things when it comes to universal remote controls, but with Harmony gone and Sofa Baton being a bit iffy, have we considered recommending installer-only solutions more frequently? Universal Remote, the brand, which I have actually reviewed and programmed myself and used before they decided to go to the dealer-only side of it, and RTI have a wide variety of solution, and then there's full automation systems like Control4, Savant, and Crestron. Lots of people are willing to spend the money if it works and it isn't a hassle. I have already mentioned on this podcast, I believe, that I am considering calling our local installer to get a price for a system for my parents, simply because they'll pay for it. They don't care. They've got the money. I mean, they're not rich, but they're retired, and every year they have to take a certain amount of money out, or they pay taxes on it, or some crap.
And your parents are not frequently changing their AV setup.
They're literally never changing their AV setup. So yes, I have considered this. I think it is a viable solution. I know most of the people on this podcast are not saying, who are asking us, are not saying which remote system should I go with. They're saying Harmony is dead. What can I get for $100 or less?
Yeah, I mean, I see where he's coming from. Like maybe we should encourage people to consider it more than we do. And I think if the question sort of falls in that, we would, if somebody is saying that's the sort of price range, or that they're willing to work with an installer. The reason it's difficult is because there is this sort of line in the sand where you cannot buy a new device, bring it home, and integrate it into a Control4 or even an RTI system on your own. You have to send an email. They don't necessarily have to roll a truck to your place and actually be there in person. A lot of the programming can be done remotely. And of course, there are the people who point to, if you get the right installer, sometimes, they'll give you the access codes to let you do it, because they know if you screw something up, you're going to have to call them, and that's an even bigger payday for them. And but that is not the, it's not guaranteed to be that way. That's not the normal way that it's going to be marketed or sold or anything like that. The idea is somebody else does it, and you just pay them for their time to do the programming. So for a lot of our audience who wants to do this stuff themselves, who wants to be hands-on, and who changes their setup frequently, so that would be a lot of paying people to, every time you add an Apple TV, you get, the new version of the Roku that just came out this year, you get a new disc player, you get a new projector, you get a new TV every year. Not being able to do that yourself when you enjoy doing it yourself, it's why we were so sad when Harmony went away, because that really was the thing that let you do that at a pretty reasonable price, and you could do DIY. So we still have hope for Sofa Baton. They have done a ton of firmware updates and app updates already. It is improving. It's getting better day by day, so I still hold out some hope for that. But yeah, I'll take it under advisement that once in a while, if it seems like saying, what, it sounds like this is more trouble than it's worth, maybe look into calling a Control4 person.
Right. I guess I'm thinking RTI for my parents, or Universal Remote would work too. But what they really don't need a whole bunch. They've only got the couple of devices. So we'll talk more about it if I ever decide to do it. Mostly I'm just too busy to call the installer place, because I'm not going to let them do it because they'll get ripped off.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't trust if they got a reputable person, but I don't know who the reputable people are around here. So I would, and I'm not looking for a handout. I'm not going to try to, I'm Tom from AVRant. You should give me free stuff. Do you know who I am? By the way, if you ever
not
said
that many people
know who I am, yeah, no one does really. Ken is asking on behalf of a friend. Okay, sure you are. This friend has a large backyard, roughly 75 by 75. Do you even know who I am, Ken? And he just had a 37-foot pool put in all directions. Anyways, along with extensive landscaping. If you exit the rear of the house, there's a large deck across the entire width. So 75 foot long.
Well, not quite. There's a yard walkway on one side, but yes.
All around the perimeter of the deck is a flower bed shown in purple in the included sketch. So if you're not looking on YouTube or on the whatever sketch thing he uses to put the pictures up, you don't know what we're talking about. Beyond the flower bed, there's landscaping leading down to the pool. Behind the pool is a retaining wall, which is shown in red. And then the rear of the property slopes down to an easement behind the retaining wall. So it's a slope on the other side there.
Yep.
Okay.
Tom's looking at the graph now.
Yeah, I am looking at the graphic. So there's a house. I don't know. It doesn't look like a 75-foot pool, but whatever. It's 37-foot pool, but it's certainly got a shape to it.
Yes, it is not a rectangle.
It looks like an upside-down Ditto, if you are a Pokemon fan. He would like to install an outdoor speaker system, but he has a number of requests and restrictions. He doesn't want to use a bunch of Bluetooth speakers. That's what I was going to say. He's tried that before and been annoyed when moving a phone would interrupt the music in one or more speakers. He wants a wired system. He'd like to have an AV receiver inside the house that powers the outdoor speakers and can be used and could use whatever music source he'd like. The speakers can only go in the flower bed. They cannot be attached to the house or the deck, and they cannot be attached to the retaining wall at the back. Flower bed only, but he is fine if the speakers are visible and look like speakers. They don't need to be camouflaged as rocks or lights or anything. Obviously, they need to be able to withstand being permanently installed outside. Where is he? Do we know where he's from?
I don't know. I don't know what state or country.
I will tell you right now, in Florida, nothing makes it outside permanently.
Okay.
So, maybe that's not what you mean. He wants to cover the whole large backyard area, the pool, the yard, areas on both sides of the pool with music, but he doesn't want the experience where just a couple of PA speakers are blasting and you nearly go deaf if you're standing near them. He'd rather use multiple speakers all playing at once at reasonable levels. He'd be fine with having to start near the AV receiver inside the house using an app on the phone, but once the music is playing, he wants to be able to walk away with the phone and have the music keep playing on its own, basically the way Chromecast used to work, and if you could control the music from anywhere in the backyard, so much the better. He'd like to accomplish all this with a budget of around $2,000 or less. So, which receiver would we suggest? Probably the one that's actually available.
And the one I'm going to suggest is...
And will he need a separate source device plugged into that receiver to achieve what he wants? So let's just talk in general here. So yes, the way that Chromecast and used to work, the Chromecast audio, and the Chromecast still does work this way, which is once you start something playing, it's not streaming from your phone. The device is taking it from its own internet connection. So that would be the solution, I think, using Chromecast or something similar.
But you don't have to. You don't have to
because a lot of stuff has these streaming apps built in, and once you control them from your phone, you can walk away and it continues to do the thing. So, depending on which receiver what Rob's going to suggest, then we'll see. So what do you got, Rob?
So I am going to suggest, and quite strongly, I think this is the right choice, is Onkyo's TXNR 6100. This can be found for $700, brand new, so it's going to be able to work within the budget that we're talking about. Getting that from, just Amazon or Best Buy, so NR 6100 from Onkyo. Now, The reason I'm going specifically with this, first of all, Onkyo's receivers work with basically any streaming service that you could imagine. You can use Onkyo's own control app, and that will work directly with Spotify, Tidal, Deezer, Pandora, TuneIn, a few others that aren't mentioned on their page. That's built right into the AV receiver itself. So the AV receiver is a player, and that control app is just to control it. It's not coming from the phone. The phone is basically just a remote control using the app. The receiver itself is playing directly from those services. So that would work on its own. If for some reason you don't want to do that, Onkyo's receivers are set up to work with any of the voice assistants, Apple's, Google's, Amazon's voice assistants. So you could have a little smart speaker that's, lives inside your house and use it that way. They are Sonos certified, so you can do it through a Sonos system if you've already got that. They're also DTS Play-Fi certified. So it's like every flavor that you might want to use, it's available in this Onkyo. So I think that's a very good way. You can also, of course, still use Bluetooth if you wanted to, but then if you took your phone away with that, that wouldn't work. It also has Bluetooth out, so you can send it from the receiver to a pair of Bluetooth headphones, which is another nice thing you can do. So the Onkyo AVRs also have a mono music listening mode. We actually just talked last week about how Denon and Marantz's multi-channel stereo mode is not actually just duplicating the exact same sound into every speaker. Onkyo has mono music, which is literally duplicating the exact same sound in every single speaker, and I think that is going to be a benefit. I don't really want stereo separation in this backyard. That's not what we're going for. We're not going for left-right stereo separation across the backyard. We just want every speaker to play the exact same sound, and that's what the mono music listening mode will let you do. So I think that's perfect for this application. On top of that, it's ready for anything you might want to plug in. It's got 3 HDMI 2.1 ports, and then it has a reasonable amount of power, 100 watts per channel. It does only have ACU EQ. It does not have Dirac. I cannot imagine that being a concern for a backyard setup. We're not going to use room correction in your 75-foot by 75-foot backyard. So I like that as the solution.
How many speakers does it have?
It is 7 channels. 7 channels by 100, and I think that's going to be fine.
Yeah, so the other remember when we're wiring this thing up, we can always wire some in series and parallel.
If we needed to. Yeah.
A bunch of other stuff.
It does also have pre-outs for Zone 2, so you could activate Zone 2 and attach another amplifier to the Zone 2 pre-outs on this thing if you need even more speakers.
So which speakers should you get and how many, and where do we think they should be placed in the flower bed? So I did do an article that had outdoor speakers on it. Most of them are attached to the house.
Yeah.
I will look that up real quick. But yeah, and then the other ones are, they look like rocks. And that's just because that's what most people want. I'm sure Rob's going to have suggestions that are not that way. But the big problem with outdoor speakers, just kind of in general, is that they don't, there's not that many of them. And even though they're weatherproof, they're kind of like, well, if you put it under eave and they don't get direct rain on them, they're weatherproof. Most of the ones that are truly weatherproof are like the ones that look like rocks, where they just know it's going to get sprinkled with a sprinkler, or rained, or flooded, or whatever. That said, when you run your wire, which I know we'll probably talk about at some point,
a little bit,
you're gonna need in-ground rated wire.
Direct burial rated speaker wire, which I'm gonna have a link to that coming up.
Yeah, which is not super expensive unless you buy the pretty stuff from Kemper Cable.
There is some price associated to it. So I'm going to defer to Brent Butterworth on this. He tested a whole bunch of outdoor speakers for the Wirecutter and came away saying that this was actually his so-called upgrade pick, but you're going to need it for this sort of size that you're dealing with, the size of yard that you're dealing with. And it is from Dayton Audio. It is their IO8 XT. It is available in both a black and a white finish, so whatever works best. They do look like speakers. They don't look like rocks or anything, but you said that was fine, so you have your choice of a white or a black finish. These are completely fully sealed. It is an 8-inch driver, as the IO8 indicates in its name. It's a soft dome tweeter in there. Brent was really quite high on their sound quality. And it is, like I said, completely sealed design. It actually has a passive radiator on the back, which helps with the output capabilities, particularly down into the bass. But key here, it is IP66 rated. So that's a rating for both water resistance and dust resistance, which is something we don't always immediately think about, but is really important for outdoors. It does have 70 volt and 100 volt taps on there in case you're attaching it to a low voltage system like that, but it also just has a regular 8 ohm bypass. So make sure you're set to the 8 ohm bypass. That's something important because you're just connecting this to a regular AV receiver with the spring loaded binding posts that are part of this thing. You want to make sure you're in that 8 ohm bypass. I want to stress that because otherwise you can have a problem if it's set to one of the other settings. So basically, from its output capabilities, 6 of these should be able to cover that basically 5,600 square foot area that you're dealing with.
Yeah, but if you just want some in the flower bed, though, that flower bed is, I don't know what these black circles are. I guess
that's landscaping. That's landscaping. But every 12 feet along the back there, if you have a speaker every 12 feet, firing out into the backyard there, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Then you still have that 7th binding post available and the Zone 2 pre-outs. If it turns out you need even more, you're available. But part of it is these speakers cost about $170 each. So $160. There's actually a little price discount if you get at least 4 of them. So $167 each, right? So 7 of them together would be $1,170. Now $700 for the AV receiver plus that. You're within the $2,000 budget, but we do need that direct burial speaker wire, and you're going to need a fair length of it because you're going across a pretty large area coming out of the house and going all across this 75-foot yard. So I point you on Parts Express. The same place that you'll get the Dayton speakers is Parts Express. They have Belden's direct burial speaker wire. The 16 gauge is fine, but you're probably going to need 500 feet of that. So that's, $265 for that. So 6 of those Dayton IO8 XT speakers, plus $265 for the 500 feet of speaker wire, plus $700 for the AV receiver. You just did it. You just fit within the budget that you're talking about. And I think that's a pretty good setup.
Right. I would also suggest that even though it does say direct burial and you can directly bury them in the ground, I would still put a PVC pipe underneath.
Not a bad idea at all.
Just because you want to hit the pipe and then know that you hit something before you start.
Indeed. Whenever somebody puts a little trowel into that landscaping.
That or even and you don't have to seal it up or anything like that. You just have to protect the wire and also like from your lawnmower or anything else that could happen. Your dog decide to dig stuff up. I would still put a little PVC down there just to protect it.
Sure.
So what about the notion of being able to control the music from anywhere in the backyard, some sort of Wi-Fi extender? I will tell you, I put a mesh system in my house, and simply because it was the Wi-Fi extenders suck. Okay? That is my universal review of every single Wi-Fi extender I've had.
Well, the ones that are wireless, the ones that detect the Wi-Fi signal and then try to repeat it or something like that. Yeah, I agree.
I have used many at different homes, and everybody has said we've got extenders, but it's best if you're in this room. Well, then that's not an extender, is it? Okay, I have to break it to you. So yes, we put a mesh system in our house, and it was just like, the main router was way over on one side of the house. It almost reached to my bedroom and almost reached to the back bedroom for the kids, but not quite. So we just put another router of the exact, and it was the Asus routers, the exact same type, which gave a much better, better coverage. So if you've got the ability to put a mesh system in, that's what I would do.
Yeah, whether that'll actually cover the backyard, all of it, that's tough to say. So I'll just mention like TP-Link. I'm just going for one that has a reasonable price. TP-Link does have a outdoor rated wireless. Now, you call it extender, but this is hardwired, okay? You're running an Ethernet cable from this outdoor unit back to your router inside the house.
Right.
So make sure
now
you're
that's
using
different. Yeah.
make sure you're using direct burial outdoor rated Ethernet wire, which is that's cheap and easy to find. But just make sure you're using that. Now this is designed to be like on a pole. that's really the idea. It's got the bracket to just go on a pole. So you sink a pole somewhere, or maybe you have multiple of these, because you can set up multiple of these as long as you have enough ports on your router. So that would be a way to have an outdoor rated Wi-Fi connection.
I would put it on the far side of that pool for sure.
Yeah, and the TP links are $70 a piece, so not crazy breaking the bank. The only other thing I wanted to mention is one good idea when you connect your speaker wire to the binding post, put a big old blob of silicone sealant on there, because you just want to make sure that there's no exposed copper or exposed binding post at all. So just a blob of silicone sealant will do that just nicely.
We're done. Zach has always found our previous advice to him helpful, so he's hoping we can assist him once again. The start of that sentence made me think that the second part of the sentence was going to be, except for now.
Yeah.
Okay, but he's got a 77-inch LG C1 OLED. Oh, you really should have waited for the C3 so you can get those lenses. Right. You didn't want the lenses? How did you not know that these were coming? Don't you live in the future with me, where I'm at right now?
Yep.
Poor Zach. Should have listened to our lens advice when we gave it literally 5 seconds ago. For the most part, it's great, but there's one issue that drives his whole family crazy. During dark scenes, initially, things look great with OLED's perfect blacks and detail and shadows. But if the scene remains dark for a prolonged period of time, the whole screen dims automatically until it's so dark that nobody can make out what's being shown anymore. Zach says this happens whether it's Dolby Vision, HDR10, or SDR. It happens whether he uses the built-in apps or external sources, such as the NVIDIA Shield, and it happens across all the different apps, so he's pretty darn sure isn't a problem on the source end of things. He's followed Vincent Tio's settings from HGTV Test YouTube channel, so he's in filmmaker mode for everything, and he has energy savings off under the OLED screensaver, adjust logo brightness to off, AI brightness and AI picture mode are off, dynamic contrast is off, and the firmware is up to date. Boy, he tried everything.
Seems I will say that
he's a I was gonna call him a filthy liar for saying that his family noticed things, but by the end of this, I was like, yeah, I think that my family would notice it too. So, is there simply a setting he missed? Is it possible his particular unit is defective, and should he contact LG support? I will tell you, this sounds exactly like those stupid settings that are like, oh, when your room is dim, it'll change the brightness on your screen. Sensor. It sounds just like that, and it used to drive me absolutely. The one house I've ever seen that I was like, how do you live? Like, this is hell. This is my circle of hell. It is living it like without a remote in that room with the TV constantly changing brightness based on who walked in front between the light source and it. Yeah. So yes, I'm sure there's a setting someplace. Rob, find it.
So I mean, what you're talking about, the ambient light sensor thing, that's typically under the AI section. So if you go into the general section, the AI section, now he said he turned all that stuff off.
Yeah, he did.
I'm just like, let's really make sure, because that does sort of sound like there is another one though called Motion Eye Care. Motion Eye Care, which is another power saving function that dims the screen based on how much images are moving. So if stuff stays still, it dims it.
I would like to meet the engineer who invented all these things and just slap the stupid out of them.
Yeah, so it didn't specifically mention Motion Eye Care, so sounds like it might be a culprit. Just one to double check if that's also up. I'm going to mention a few things here. Filmmaker mode, I think it's extremely handy because you go into filmmaker mode and almost everything is set, but it really is meant for a pitch black room. And it turns True Motion completely off, which isn't actually the optimal setting for True Motion. It's good. I'm happy to have filmmaker mode, but I'm going to make a suggestion to use the ISF Expert Dark as your picture mode of choice. For Dolby Vision, that doesn't exist, so you'll want to use the Cinema mode for Dolby Vision. So I'm going to suggest doing that under the picture settings, under the advanced section. There is another not power saving thing, but there's a thing called Reduce Blue Light. And make sure that is turned off, because you don't want to be reducing light. You you are fine with the blue light being where it's supposed to be accurate. Under the brightness sub-menu of the picture settings, make sure that the OLED pixel brightness is not set any higher than 40, because if it's set higher than 40, the automatic brightness limiter will kick in. Now, that shouldn't happen with dark scenes like you're talking about, but it's a possibility that some little highlight on there is, it's almost all dark, but there's a little highlight. If your OLED pixel brightness setting is set any higher than 40, automatic brightness limiter is going to kick in. So that's another potential culprit. The peak brightness setting should be off for SDR. It should be high for HDR and for Dolby Vision. I will suggest you could try changing the gamma setting, because the filmmaker mode sets it to 2.4, or in fact, it sets it to BT 1886.
Yeah, but this sounds like it's changing in the midst.
I know,
right?
But I'm just saying, again, that's for a pitch black room. So when you're in ISF Expert Dark mode or Cinema mode for Dolby Vision, set your gamma to 2.2, because that's actually, unless you are in a completely pitch black room, but otherwise you'll get more shadow detail that way. So then I talked about True Motion. That's in the clarity sub menu. Cinema screen is a setting that should be on. That's just going to make sure you get proper 5.5 pulled down from 24 frames per second things. You actually want True Motion to be set to user, and then for both sliders to be set to 0, because changing it to completely off runs 60 hertz things at 60 hertz instead of doing 5.5 pull down for a 120 hertz refresh. So set True Motion to user and both sliders to 0. OLED ProMotion definitely needs to be off. That's black frame insertion. That could be robbing you of light. So I think that's all of the things. I will say the other one, under support, there is the OLED screensaver thing. If you actually turn the screen move setting off, you get perfect 1-for-1 pixel mapping, which doesn't happen if you have the pixel orbiter, the screen move, turned on.
That is dumb. I would like to say that.
It's supposed to be make sure you don't get burn-in setting, but I would rather have 1-to-1 perfect pixel mapping and just make sure my OLED pixel brightness is turned down to 40 or lower, so I don't get burn-in that way. Then you have the option, Vincent Teo is against HDR10 dynamic tone mapping. I think that if you are in a lit room, it looks better. But that's a purely subjective thing. He is correct that objectively dynamic tone mapping should be off to be like perfect to the signal. But if you're having trouble seeing detail in the shadows because you have some light in your room, that's exactly what dynamic tone mapping helps to fix. So those are all the settings to check. If that doesn't work, then call LG. But try those things first.
It's a very strange thing, because it does sound like it's some sort of adaptive.
I think it's the motion I care.
Yeah, we'll see. Scott has a dedicated theater room. He's using all in-wall and in-ceiling speakers, and he has acoustic treatments on the walls. He's planning to install a stretched fabric system that will visually hide everything. Should he remove the speaker grills from his in-walls and in-ceiling speakers, would forcing the sound to go through the grills and the stretched fabric wall covering have any effect on the sound, however minor that may be? Measurable? Yes.
Possibly. Depends on the fabric.
Depends on the fabric, depends on the grills, depends on all that stuff. But I would say, generally speaking, there you can measure an effect going through speaker grill and another acoustically transparent fabric. I put air quotes there. You couldn't see them because you're not on YouTube, but you might be. But they did do that, because not all acoustically transparent fabric is 100% acoustically transparent.
Indeed.
But that said, audibly, I think it makes zero difference. If it were me, I think it would depend on whether or not I thought about it before I installed the fabric.
Also,
like if I thought about it before I just installed the fabric, I would probably pull them off, but I don't really care.
From two practical standpoints, I would probably leave the grills on. One, it's stretched fabric. You can lean against stretched fabric and still lean into the speaker, so I'd rather still have the grill on from a physical standpoint. Second, if the drivers of your speakers are metallic, you can sometimes get a weird little catches the light just at an angle, through the fabric.
I guess so.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very
if you've
much
got like clips or something like that, I suppose that might be the case.
Yeah,
it depends on how far back
that's right, and it's got to be just the right angle. But if there's a possibility of getting a weird little glint off of the metallic drivers, then that would be another reason. In terms of the performance of the audio, I would not be worried about having the speaker grills still on there and then the stretched fabric over it. If the stretched fabric is going to make an acoustic difference, it's going to do that whether the speaker grills are on or off, right? It's going to make the same difference that it always makes, and the speaker grills make essentially no difference. At least they should if they're properly done. So whether the speaker grill is there or not is not going to be the difference. The difference is going to be the fabric itself, and that's going to be whether you have the speaker grills on or off. So I would leave the speaker grills on.
Yeah. I think audibly doesn't make any difference. No. I think you would be hard pressed during content to notice any real difference. Yeah. I don't. Rob makes good points. I don't know that I would. I mean, the
research says if you listen to more than one speaker at a time, you're going to have a heck of a time telling things apart anyway.
I know, right? That's why I only have one speaker plugged in at any given time.
That's right.
Travis is trying to help out a friend with a speaker recommendation. He's got an art studio set up in a 2,000 square foot space, so about 18,000 cubic feet. Completely open floor plan with minimalist design. It's all hard reflective surfaces with zero acoustic treatments. None of that is going to change, so the room is what it is. Headphones, Travis.
Yeah.
Headphones is the answer to the question, unless you like listening to, like, what are those throat singer guys? And then
even then,
it echoes around the room.
It won't be accurate to the resonance that they generated. There'll be additional room resonance on top of it.
But who can tell the difference, Travis?
They could. The throat singers themselves could, I'm sure.
The throat singers would come in and go, well, this doesn't sound right at all. These acoustics are terrible in here. You should put some room treatments up. See, even the throat singers have our backs.
That's right.
At the moment, he's got 2 pair of Polk bookshelf speakers, 1 pair in the kitchen area and the other in the art studio area. Vinyl records are the primary source because, of course, they are. This guy's pretentious, and I don't like it.
Not when you see the price point.
And he wants to upgrade both pairs of speakers, but for under $1,000 total. So he wants 4 speakers for $1,000.
$250 each or less.
He was going to bring over his pairs of Martin Logan Motion 2 and Motion 4 bookshelf speakers with their folded ribbon tweeters just so they could demo something that's different from his current Polks. But what speakers could we recommend? Travis was thinking maybe the ELAC Debut 2, but what else? So, I mean, nothing's going to sound great.
Nothing is going to be giving its best performance.
There is no speaker design that I can think of that will not be irreparably damaged by this room. Even if you had $20,000 a pair and you spent them on electrostatic speakers, and those electrostatic speakers had that really super narrow dispersion where it only sounds good in one seat, it would still reflect all over the room and screw everything up. So there is, in my mind, really nothing you can do. So I do agree with the price point. Like if everything's going to sound kind of garbo, don't spend too much money on it. I can kind of see where Rob's going here as far as the suggestions. So I'm just going to say that if it were me and I hadn't even looked at what Rob has already got here in these lists, the first thing I would have done is gone to accessories for less. And the reason is because if you're going to get something, get it for as cheap as possible. And Polk is a perfectly fine solution for these.
Like, to be honest, I'm glad you're going to do the test with the speakers that you already have. I'm sure there will be a difference in sound because the Martin Logan Motion series sounds significantly different from the Polk speakers. But I think you, as perhaps the more experienced listener, will be like, yeah, that's not the speakers, that's the room. I think Travis
you're listening to the room.
Travis is going to recognize. If you got the ELAC Debut 2.0 at $400 a pair, so $800 total for 2 pairs, that's for the 6.5-inch version. That's not a bad choice. It's just they aren't the easiest to drive. They're not really meant for this size of a room. I mean, none of the speakers I'm going to suggest are really meant for this size of a room, but there's a little bit of hesitation on my part there because output isn't really their strong point from that ELAC Debut 2.0s. I'm assuming this isn't being attached to some, kilowatt amplifier. So my thought here was, let's just try to get the most even and uniform dispersion coming out of these speakers as possible. Like Tom mentioned, it doesn't matter how directional the speakers are, you're going to have a lot of reflections. So let's just make sure those reflections are as even and uniform as we can get. That's my approach to this. So I did exactly what Tom thought. I added over to Accessories for Less because Accessories for Less sells KEF. And I'm thinking, hey, they're concentric drivers. It's throwing the sound out evenly in every direction about as good as you can. And you can get the Q350s. You can get the Q350s speakers in the black finish, in the white finish, or in the walnut finish. So if you want different finish options, those are available in the KEF Q350s, and they're $500 a pair for the refurbished KEF Q350s available at accessories for less. So that checks all the boxes that I'm really concerned about. One little weird thing to be aware of is they do not come with speaker grills. So the grills are extra, and if you want them, the speaker grills only come in black. So even if you're attaching them to the white version of the speakers, you'll have black speaker grills, and they are an extra charge. So it's a little bit weird that way, but that's where I'd point you. If I was going to get anything for here, that's what I'd get.
Yeah, I just am extreme. I just don't know that you're going to put these KEFs in there and go,
they're so much better than the Polks.
So much better than the Polks. I think you're going to end up at the very end going, I guess it's different.
Yeah, if
Polks aren't the most neutral speaker, so
yeah, and I think these Q350s, like in a properly acoustically treated room, I think they're better speakers.
They are objectively better speakers, I think. Yes.
So if you did put them in this nightmare of a room and still thought they sounded better, I wouldn't say that's crazy either. Like, the sound coming out of the speaker from the KEF Q350s will be a better sound as it originated from the speaker.
Yeah.
Then the room takes over is going to mess up any pair of speakers that you put in there. So you're starting from a better place. Maybe you'll end up at a better place. That's the hope. But do your experiment with the Motions first, because if you don't hear a difference between the Polks and your Martin Logan Motion Series speakers, because they are very different sounding speakers, if you don't hear a difference there, then it isn't worth it. Just stick with the Polks.
Yeah, I wouldn't even bother with the KEFs at that point.
Exactly.
Chris's theater is 19 by 12 by 8 feet high, and it's enclosed, so he's dealing with a little under 1,800 cubic feet. So, a little bit smaller than the last room.
Mm-hmm.
7 feet at the back of the room is taken up with an 8-inch riser. He's using dual SVS PB12 NSD subs, one at the middle of the front wall and the other in the middle of the back wall.
Mm-hmm.
He ran Odyssey, and for the most part, he's loving the results, but he hasn't experienced this pants flapping bass pressurization he's heard about. So, are his subs capable of pressurizing his room? Yes.
Dear Lord, yes.
Like, objectively, easily, yes. I think you can look on the knobs on the back of your subwoofers and go, is it at max? It is not. Is it loud? It is. Mm-hmm. So this pants flapping that I have alluded to many times.
As a phrase, yes.
As a phrase, yes. I have way too big of subwoofers in my room. Rob has way too big of subwoofers in his room.
Even more so, yes.
Yeah, even more
Smaller room, even higher output subs.
Output subs.
Ridiculous.
The only time I have had my pants flap or that experience has been in whatever they're calling it. It used to be called Man's Chinese. I think it was Brahmin's Chinese. I think
it's now the TCL Chinese Theater now. Yes,
they still got the Chinese on there. I feel like that's going to get dropped eventually. But anyways,
that wasn't really the part that might have been a problem.
I don't know. Anyway, so that's the only place I've really experienced that, and that has everything to do with how much air they have to move to have that room be pressurized.
Yeah, like it wasn't literally the sound waves flapping the pants. No. It's that you had ported subwoofers physically moving air
underneath the seats. Yeah. And it would blow up my pant leg, and I would think there was ants in there.
Yeah.
That's what every time I went to the movie center, I think there's ants in this place, and I would scratch my legs and try to figure. And I eventually figured out it was the subwoofers. In my house, where my couch rumbles at not even near reference level, when we're just watching stuff and there's a little rumble in the background. Severance is a good example of that. Severance has got like this sort of low rumble in the background that you're not really supposed to notice, but it just sort of is just quieting.
Yep.
And if you have it up at a decent volume, you can feel the couch just slightly vibrate. That is amazing, but I don't feel wind going up my pant leg, mostly because my feet are not on the ground. I am reclining, so there's a lot of reasons why this isn't happening. So your subs are capable of pressurizing the room.
Definitely.
The pants flapping is a very specific experience that can only really happen in very specific situations, and I doubt that you want that to be happening in your own home theater.
I mean, one way to make it happen is to have a ported sub that is front ported with a port that's too small.
Yeah,
because that'll just
then you can hear the whistling.
That'll just cause the velocity of the air coming out to be wrong. So if you really want actual pants physically flapping, you could DIY a sub and put in a port that's too small for the design, so that you could do that. I mean,
it'd have to be right in front of you.
Yep.
Number one, and then
or right behind you.
Because remember the Man's Chinese or Grauman, whatever they're calling it,
TCL.
the Chinese theater, TCL Chinese theater, doesn't have those it didn't last time I was there. It had normal seats that kind of leaned back a little bit, but that was it, if I remember correctly. So your feet were on the ground, and it was a big open shot from the bottom of from the floor all the way to the back of the room. So if those subwoofers, which they certainly were had their ports near the floor and were blowing forward, it was going underneath all these people's legs. That is not going to happen in your home theater because you've got a couch that certainly touches the floor. All the way around it, because most couches do these days. They certainly aren't as high as the bottom of your seat, which is where they are in that theater, which creates much less space for air to move. So it's just not really reasonable to try to get this to happen in there. I mean, buy a fan, my dude.
Sure. I will just say, do have Odyssey Dynamic EQ turned on, and be aware that if you're primarily watching Ultra HD content now, that there are unfortunately a lot of releases where they have nerfed the super deep bass on the Ultra HD Blu-ray version versus the 1080p Blu-ray version. So sometimes that's going on too, that the bass isn't in the signal anymore. You could check out the what is it called? I'm forgetting that. BEQ, the bass EQ thread over on AVS Forum, if you want a whole list of how much you have to crank up the bass in your subwoofer to get back to the way the actual reference volume was. So I'll include another link there for the BEQ thread.
So what should full pressurization sound and feel like? He's wondering if he's missing something, or perhaps he's already felt it but didn't recognize it as such. Maybe we could point him to some specific scenes. Would you like to buy Dune?
I was going to say Dune. That one is a pretty easy one.
Literally the entire movie from start to finish. The music is way too loud. Yeah. And there is just, there's very few times. The key, though, is you are not listening near reference volume. So,
well, we don't know for sure.
We don't know that for sure, but most people do not get near reference volume at home because it's not very comfortable, and they have other things that they'd like to do in their room, including, not have a headache when they leave, that sort of thing. So, to me, the only time I've ever really gotten to reference volume and above is the Thor Ragnarok disc.
And that wasn't actually reference volume because the signal was wrong.
So right, the signal was wrong.
Your volume dial was at 0. That still wasn't reference volume.
I was just trying to get some bass out of
That's
that.
Right. That's
okay.
Right.
But for most of the time, I'm at, when I'm watching the Blu-ray, I might be up at -5. So, yes, get Dune, crank it, close your door.
Watch the ornithopters take off, because if you want something that's akin to pants flapping, that's there. Yeah. I will mention one scene that's not going to be in either of the links that I'm going to include, because I'm just going to include a couple of links. These are from AVS Forum. They've actually got whole demonstration downloads. The first link, the downloads are in BDMV file folder or ISO format. So if you don't have something like a Zapiti or a home theater PC that can play those back directly, or in fact VLC player on like an Apple TV or an NVIDIA Shield VLC player will play those back. But if you don't have any of those things, you'll need to use something like Make MKV to turn it into an MKV file that Plex or something could play. But honestly, just use VLC player on a streaming device, and that'll work fine for these first ones. The second one is just straight to just some test material. So those are the two links that I'll include there from AVS Forum. But I will mention Charlie's Angels, the Cameron Diaz and Lucy Liu, the first one, not any of the sequels, but the first one. There's a scene where some motorcycles drive by from right to left, and that has some like actual wind movement if your subs are capable of it. So that's one specific scene that came to mind because I just remember it.
I don't remember that. Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty short moment, so I can't tell you the timestamp.
I've seen that movie a lot too, so I'm trying to remember that scene, but okay.
Specifically the motorcycles, yep.
Aras. Last week we discussed Aras' desire to get a pair of huge subs. Already badmouthed you, my dude. Sorry. Don't listen to the beginning of the podcast. That was the other Tom. He's evil. The SVS PP16 Ultra are JTR captivators, and even though he's planning to put them in the living room, that's roughly 15 by 20 or so, when he plans to buy his new house. We talked about potential placement issues and having to turn the volume down so low that you might impact the auto-on function. Sounds like something I would say. Mm-hmm. But we also talk about how most living rooms are open to other parts of the house. All that was taken under advisement by Aras. He's now back with some clarifications and more questions. My dude, just buy them. Just stop. Just stop trying to make me tell you.
Only the first one is about subwoofers. Then he goes to other topics.
I mean, you're like my kids with the, but Daddy, I need an iPhone. You don't need an iPhone. You don't go anywhere that I'm not there. You don't need it. But my friends all have... I don't care. Whatever room he ends up with, he intends to make it enclosed. If he can find a house with a good room in the basement for the theater, he'll use that. But that's a little bit rare in his area. So it'll probably be the living room. He intends to take down the existing drywall, install staggered studs, and double drywall with green glue, and construct a doorway and door. If it doesn't already have one. So this really will be a 26 to 2,700 cubic foot space when it's ready. Boy.
Yeah,
you are very optimistic.
100 cubic feet, dual PB16 Ultras. Sure.
You better put some big studs in there, my man. That's gonna be, yeah. So honestly, when I shop for houses, every time I've shopped for a house, I've had a home theater in mind. Mm-hmm. And the first house that we bought, I was like, well, we can put it here, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that's the house we ended up with because of all the other reasons. And then we bought this house, and we actually had a room, but it was the wrong shape. So I ended up calling some friends, Clint and the guys over the Pro Tool Reviews, and they came out and they helped me move a wall. And by help, I mean they did it, and I stood around going, "You guys are doing a great job." And I ended up with a theater, but it was luck. It was luck then. It'll be luck for you. I know you're saying I'm going to make it happen no matter what. You are being very, I don't want you to go down this path.
He does say he has a carpenter friend who would be helping on the construction. He's got a budget set aside to do said construction. So
I'm just saying, it doesn't mean that you're gonna be able to do it. You're gonna end up with a house that doesn't have the real space. So I'm just trying to
also want to stress that if this house was designed with an open living room, and like I say, most living rooms have a permanent opening,
close enough part of it is going to absolutely kill your...
It's the air that I'm worried about. It's the HVAC that I'm worried about. Because, you can construct the wall. That's not that difficult. It's whether your HVAC system was designed to work with a separation between the living room and the rest of the house. So that might be a huge additional cost if the HVAC needs to be significantly changed in any way. Just be ready that HVAC could be a very big concern. But we'll put those things aside for the moment.
Okay. Furthermore, his wife and two daughters are about 90% on board with his level of home theater obsession. That's probably a very optimistic number as well. But let's go on. Nobody in their household likes full reference volume. The movies will typically be played at minus 15 or maybe minus 10. So he sort of liked our SVS PC 4000 idea. Maybe he could even do 4 of those instead of 2 PB16 Ultras. Again, he's well aware he'd have way more output capability than he'd ever need, but he's super worried about bass quality. He wants every detail and no distortion. What are our thoughts? You still don't need it, but
you really don't.
PC 2000s, if you don't even need 4 of those, but
2,700 cubic feet. You just I was thinking overkill, like fantastic overkill would be a pair of monolith M12 V2s for 2,700 cubic feet. The M12 V2s for a very reasonable price compared to what you were considering. I'd be like, that would be some fabulous overkill for this room if you want boxes. PC 2000 Pros. I mean, heck, do 4 of them. Why not? It'll easily fit the budget you were considering spending.
I know, right? We're still saving them thousands of dollars.
The only reason I said PC 4000s was because I assumed your living room would be open to the rest of the house.
You do not need 4000s.
If it's an enclosed 2,700 cubic feet, and that's on the high end, is the 2,700 cubic feet.
Okay, so this is what you do. You buy 2 PC 2000s and 2 PC 4000s, and you place them in opposing corners. Okay, in your new room after everything else is done. You got the room treatments up and everything else. 2 PC 2000s, 2 PC 4000s. You run them 2 at a time. Okay, so that you put the 2000s on and you run the calibration, and you put the 4000s on. It's going to be the same calibration, but you could run the second calibration and switch between them, and then do an A/B test on that bad boy, and then send the 2 back that you think don't make any difference, or sound worse, which will be the PC 4000s.
And you could actually try all 4 together, because any single one of those, single PC 2000 Pro has enough output for this room size, so you could try all 4 together to see what the experience of having 4 subwoofers all playing together is like, and then,
But if you're not going to just listen to us and take our word for it, if you're not going to just believe us that you're not going to be able to hear a difference, this is how you tell.
There you go.
You get the PC 2000s, your PC 4000s. Like Rob said, you can listen to all 4 of them at the same time and say, well, wait a second, they're mismatched. No, they're not. Not in your room, they're not. The only frequencies that the PC 4000s are playing are completely inaudible.
The only reason I mentioned that is because in case he's choosing, do I just stick with 2 or do I go to 4? So you'd be able to get the experience.
There you go. That's the solution.
That's it, because free 2-way shipping. Can't beat it.
On a different topic, he came across Gina Audioholics talking about speaker drivers compressing at loud volumes, and in particular, he mentioned how concentric drivers can be prone to this, since having both drivers sharing one physical space seems to places some limits on the magnet size and driver excursion. He's got KEF reference series speakers, so naturally those use concentric drivers, but he's got the towers and the large center mean that they're, my God, so much overkill in this question.
It sure is.
The towers and large center meaning that there are dedicated bass woofers. The concentric part of the speaker is strictly for the mid-range and the treble. So in the setup, he has described this enclosed living room space, and typically listening at -10, does he have anything to be concerned about? Could those concentric drivers possibly end up compressing? No. I literally cannot say no hard enough. I cannot say it loud enough. There's not a mountain I could climb that is tall enough for me to scream it from that would make it more emphatic. If I was on the moon and yelling down to you, I'd be like, I wish I was on Jupiter saying this.
Yep. No. Just flat no. I mean, we're going on in the next one, so I'm not even going to bother with an explanation. The room that you're putting these in, those speakers are too big for the room that you're going to be putting them in.
Get rid of those. Sell them. Sell them and
get some bookshelf per listens that you were so taken with.
Get the bookshelf speakers. Get something smaller that you can place more easily. They're too big. Get rid of all of this. Right. It's all terrible.
Like, is there a point at which any speaker will begin to compress? And the answer is yes. I mean, there are limitations on any speaker. The THX Dominus certified per listen speakers have a limit at which they will begin to compress. It exists somewhere.
Dominus. That's what he needs.
Right. But I mean, there is no such thing as a speaker with literally no limit to how loud it can go.
Put it in an auditorium 50 feet away from you and put a bunch of acoustic treatments in there, and yes, you'll compress it. You'll compress it. JTR's
compression-driven, horn-loaded speakers have a limit at some point. But in all of these cases, including your existing KEF reference speakers, in the room that you're going to be using them, it is so far beyond the volume level that you will ever try to reach that the answer is no. There is no concern about your concentric drivers compressing.
It's flabbergasting to me that we're having this discussion. I'm going to be honest with you.
He's so worried.
I know he is. He's so worried about things that... But this is the thing. Like, get the room. Put the speakers in there. And then listen to him and say, I'm not hearing anything wrong. Should I be worried about it? And the answer would be no, because you don't hear anything wrong. That's the ultimate test.
The next question. Okay. Here we go.
What does speaker driver compression really even sound like anyway? They've been living in an apartment and he hasn't had the chance to really crank his speakers. Is there a certain movie or piece of music that would let him get an idea of what driver compression sounds like so he can recognize it if his kefs ever do it? So,
So we should explain what speaker driver compression is. I think the easiest way to do that is you'll see it all the time in subwoofer reviews where they do the CEA 2010 measurements, because you'll see these graphs where they increase the output 5 decibels at a time, and then once they start getting to the limit of where the driver begins compressing, they'll usually go up another 3 decibels. And what you'll see is a graph that looks exactly the same shape, but just higher and higher in amplitude until they get to a certain amplitude and the shape of the graph changes a little bit. The signal said get 5 decibels or 3 decibels louder across the entire range of frequencies, and it just couldn't. At 50 or 60 hertz, it does, but at 30 or 40 hertz, it only got 1 or 2 decibels louder instead of the 3 or 5 that was requested by the signal. That is speaker driver compression. It means you have reached the output limits of that speaker, and even though the signal is saying get louder, it just can't. It can't get as loud as the signal is requesting it. That's speaker driver compression. So, did you had something to say before I get to the example? Okay, I have an example of you won't actually be reaching, because you have to turn your speakers up so loud that they reach the physical limits of what they can do, and you're not going to do that in your current apartment or in your future 2,700 cubic foot living room. You're not going to do that with your speakers. It's just not going to happen. But I have an example of a recording where it doesn't matter what volume level you play it at, it gives you a taste of what this sort of sounds like, because there's a little bit more to it than just the signal didn't get as loud as it should. There starts getting this distortion, which is what Gene has talked about if you ever hear your speakers doing it. There's this intermodulation distortion that comes into it. It's a beating sound. There's little flutters and beats in the sound, because what's happening is the driver is literally starting to not be flat anymore. Like, it starts losing its shape. It starts warbling and warping itself as it attempts to play louder but can't. So you get this weird fluttering beating sound to it, and it exists at any volume level in a recording that you can just find on YouTube, so you don't have to spend any money on here. It's from American Idol back in 2011. There was a contestant named Haley Reinhart, and she sang House of the Rising Sun. That was one of the years when Jimmy Iovine, famous from Beats Audio, was doing all the production, and he doesn't know how to produce music, even though he's Grammy winning, has a ton of huge albums, 8 Mile from Eminem and all of Dr. Dre's music and stuff. He worked on all that with all of them, but across the board, his produced music is not done very well. So, but this song in particular has these fluttering, warbling, weird beats in it that sound exactly like speaker driver compression to a bad degree. And you can hear what her voice sounds like when that happens. And if you ever hear that, and it isn't just because the recording is bad, and it's almost always because the recording is bad, not because you've actually reached the limits of your speakers. But it's a good example that I remember that vividly, because I was like, what the hell is wrong with this song?
So he'd like to know about the longevity he can expect from his KEF reference speakers. Will they last 30 years? Is there anything about them that degrades or will break down over time? And if anything were to ever break, are they repairable? So at the volume levels you're going to be playing them at, they're going to last until the heat death of the universe. But the number one thing you worry about with speakers breaking down is the surrounds around the drivers themselves. They just, especially if they're not in use, if they are in poor conditions, kept in the garage or something like that.
And we're talking about the physical connection from the driver to the cabinet. There's usually a piece of rubber in the case of the KEFs, or a piece of foam that is the physical connection between that seam, and that's usually the thing that would wear out on a speaker.
And that, when you push in your speaker, you can see that moving. Like if you go to the driver and you push it in, you'll see that little surround. That's why they call it surround, because it's all the way around the driver. It just physically keeps the dust and everything else out of there. I've had these break on me before. Sure. I've had them crack. I've had them have holes in them, and you will know it. It's not a subtle thing. It'll whistle. It'll vibrate. It'll buzz. It'll do all sorts of weird things depending on the shape of the hole that's in there. Is it repairable? Usually. Yeah. You can do that at home. There are kits that you can buy from Amazon. You can just look.
That'd be a little tricky with a KEF speaker.
It is.
So, I mean, KEF is a well-funded, reputable brand. I mean, yes, there's every possibility that in 30 years something went wrong and KEF isn't around. But in general, KEF is going to be around to help you out if it's something like that. So I'm really not very concerned at all about either the longevity in general or your ability to get it repaired or replaced by KEF should something go wrong. You're in good shape either way there. I mean, the other thing that can eventually need replacement is in the crossover. Some of the capacitors could eventually need replacement. That is a very doable thing. Yeah, that's really about it. Other than maybe corrosion, from improper storage.
Like I said, improper storage would be as long as they're in your house being used. I mean, how many times have we seen speakers from somebody who's like, these were my grandfather's?
Yeah.
Or these were my dad's, and he kept them in the garage forever, but now he doesn't have use for them anymore, and he gave them to me. Can I use them in my home theater? Like, do they make any weird sounds? No? All right, then. Knock it out. There's no reason why you can't. So they should last forever, but these speakers are only going to last until you sell them and get something smaller.
Yeah, he's worried about very theoretical things that he's read about. Which is fair. That's fine. That's what happens.
Internet's a terrible place. It really
is. This is what happens. I went through that whole stage too.
We all did.
Yeah.
How do you think we all ended up shopping for separates at one point or another?
Right.
Every single one of us did. We talk about it all the time, and we laugh about it because we have been there.
Yeah. That's always the way where we're
all
coming
the
from.
Questions you're asking, I have asked. I'm like, do I need a bigger subwoofer? What does this mean? It's only when I've actually experienced it, and I know you have to take my word for it, and I know how hard people have. How hard of a time people have doing that. Like in general, you're like, but I read this thing that confirms what I believe.
Yeah, and especially when there are so many sources also on the internet right alongside us.
That will tell you exactly which one
who have way higher viewerships and readerships than we do. And you go, I've got 7 different things saying, there's a huge difference between the PP16 Ultra and an SP2000 Pro. There's a massive difference in the sound. And then we come along and we're like, not in your room. And it's like, well, do I believe the 7, 8 examples that said there was, or do I believe the one example? But there's that thing in the back of your mind that's like, but wait, the way Tom and Rob explain it makes sense. So
and everybody else is just saying, I heard a difference.
That's right.
Okay. I cannot express enough my article on the psychology of home theater, how important it is to understand how that psychology affects others and how it affects you. Because I am in the same boat.
Yeah, we are very sympathetic to where you're coming from. I think it's very important to stress that we laugh not at you one iota. We are not laughing at you. This goes for Aras and everybody else because it bears repeating because this happens to us frequently because people are like, why are you poking fun? We chuckle and poke fun because we went through it. We still go through it. It's not like we're immune to it. Even if you know about it, you can't help it. That's the way these psychological and illusionary things work. Even if you know it's happening, you can't stop it. And so we laugh about it because it's fun.
As a reviewer, I will tell you, I review things all the time, and I write my review, and I put it up there on the internet, and some people love it, and some people hate it. It doesn't make any difference. But every once in a while, I will catch myself listening to something that I have reviewed and go, man, I freaking nailed it. I was right. Like, I am still surprised sometimes at the end of it that I'm like, I can't believe that I still feel this way about this thing. Because psychologically, I know that there are lots of forces that are causing me to feel one way or another based on a whole host of things. So when time passes and I still feel that way, it makes me happy to know that I have overcome all of those external forces. And when we're talking about these subwoofers and everything else and trying to get you into a situation where you understand those forces and also have some tools in which to combat them. Like us suggesting two PC 2000s, two PC 4000s, and then doing all those little tests is just to allow you the time to listen to them, to experience them, and to come to your own conclusion, which, if you can overcome the psychological, like if you let your wife switch them or your kids switch, which ones you're listening to at any given point, and then not tell you, and then you have to kind of guess which one it is, and you guess wrong, you're going to be like, Okay, I will tell you that. This is how powerful this stuff is. Bang & Olufsen, when I went to the Denmark or wherever the heck they are, they had a room within a room. They had this whole thing. They had these big speakers set up in this itty bitty room that was a listening room. It was set up like a whatever, like a normal, this is the normal living room. I'm like, where? It's a closet. But anyways, they had us set up in there, and they started playing the speakers, and they had these, they're nice big speakers, and then they finished the listening test, like, how you like them? Oh yeah, they sound so big. Well, everybody was talking, I wasn't talking. And they sound so big, everything else, and they're like, it wasn't those speakers, it was the ones back there, and it was these little bookshelf speakers. Psychologically, you can't look at those speakers and not think that they're the ones that are playing, because they're the ones that are front and center. But it wasn't them; it was the other ones. And of course, this blows everybody away. I can't believe how much bass they had. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, we are in what is wrong with you people? We are in a tiny room. Of course, they're going to sound the same. It is. You have to experience. Sometimes you have to, especially when you've read so much stuff and you are struggling with it. You have to sort of give yourself time to believe that what you're hearing is real. So, with somebody like SVS who was like, we'll take him back for free.
Bring him on home. You got a 45 days. It costs you nothing if you send it back.
Yeah. So I for you, that peace of mind, because no amount of us saying it is going to make you believe.
And honestly, fair enough. Because that's a tough thing.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of external forces, like Rob just said, who's like, oh yeah, it's going to make a massive difference. Like, it's a huge difference in my room, and my room's even smaller than yours. I'm like, yeah, and sure it was. I'm sure it was objectively true, and not at all just that you just spent $2,000, $3,000 on a subwoofer, and you're going to hear a difference even if there isn't one there. We are so far over time because I wasn't paying attention. So, Rob, who do we have left?
Ryan, and that's it.
Okay, Ryan. Great. Next week, Ryan. Buy my book, people. Touch of Pain. It's on sale now digitally until Gurinder makes me do the stupid other version. Actually, my wife does that. So, Gurinder, you want to start emailing her? Her email is I'm not going to answer you at avrant.com. Let's thank our listeners of the week. Let's thank Raf, Donald, and Aras for going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and leaving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 142 patrons over at patreon.com, including Ken and Chris.
Yes, indeed. Raf, Donald, and Aras, thank you all very much for the PayPal donations, and patreon.com/AVRant podcast is the place to go if you'd like to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thanks to our 142 patrons over there. Ken and Chris, thank you for being two of them.
I also want to thank Gurinder for buying my first book, Bob Moore, No Hero, along with some other book, which is for some reason larger. It must be large print. Who knows? The Orb Oracle. I don't know what it's about, but I imagine it has something to do with bowling. I think it's a bowling book.
Could be. Something circular's got to be in there, or I'm going to feel like I was misled.
And Aras, who talked us up to the Simply Stereo staff.
Yes, indeed. Gurinder and Aras, thank you very much for supporting the podcast in various ways.
Lastly, I want to thank those who sent in notes of gratitude from Ken, Gurinder, Donald, Jack, Scott, and Aras. Thank you for thanking us.
Yes, indeed. Ken, Gurinder, Donald, Jack, Scott, and Aras, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. The notes of encouragement are definitely appreciated by us, so a big thank you to you, and a thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions. If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry. And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.